In the slow, pale dawn of an early spring morning in the year 1162, on the open green-gold steppe between the Onon and the Kurlan rivers, in a small white felt yurt that smelled of wool and warm sheep, and the slow, blue smoke of dried dung burning in a small iron brazier, a young Mongol noblewoman named Holan gave birth to a son. The son was small. He was very small. He was the firstborn of her body. She held him against the worn, faded blue-grey wool of her deal, and she lifted her gentle dark eyes toward the open flap of the yurt, and she watched the early steppe dawn beginning to fall in long, pale rose lines across the green-gold grass. The boy's right fist was closed tightly, the way newborn fists are closed for a few hours after birth, before the slow, warm world begins to teach the small fingers how to open. The midwife, a stooped older Borjigin woman with a worn leather amulet at her throat, knelt beside the bed platform and gently took the small fist in her own weathered hand, and gently turned it over. Inside the small fist, between the soft pink folds of the small palm, lay a single small dark blood clot, about the size of a knucklebone, dark, almost purple, in the soft amber early morning light. The midwife did not speak for a long moment. Then she lifted her old dark eyes to Holan, and she said very softly, "This is a great sign, my lady. This is a sign that has come down to us in the old songs of the steppe. A child born with a blood clot in his fist will be a man whose hand will hold the world." Holan looked at the small fist. She looked at the small dark clot. She did not answer. She only drew the boy closer against her body, and she lowered her face into the soft warm hair of his small head, and she breathed him in. This is how he came into the world. The boy who would 65 years later, in a hide-hung yurt high in the cool stone-pine slopes of the Lupan Mountains, be the lord of half the world. We will follow that road slowly. We will follow it for 65 years and a few centuries beyond. We will move at the speed it was lived. We will not hurry. The story will breathe. His father, Yesugei, was the Khan of a small clan of the Borjigin Mongols. He was 38 years old that spring. He was a broad-weathered man with long dark hair tied back at the nape, and a thick dark moustache and a short black beard, and he wore a faded brown leather and fur deal and a simple felt cap, and he carried a curved sabre at his hip in a worked leather scabbard, and he had ridden out 3 weeks earlier on a long, slow raid against the Tatars, who were the old enemies of his people, who had killed his uncle in the time of his own boyhood, and who had been killing Borjigin Mongols on the Upper Onon for as long as anyone in the clan could remember. Yesugei came home from the raid the day before the boy was born. He came home tired. He came home with 2 prisoners, 2 Tatar warriors taken on the open steppe at the foot of the Khingan range. One of them was a man named Temujin Uge. The Mongols of the steppe in those years had a custom that a son born just after a great enemy was taken should be named for that enemy, as if the strength of the enemy would pass from the captured man to the small newborn child. So when Yesugei was told, in the long hours of the spring dawn, that his wife had borne a son, and that the son's small fist had been closed around a single dark blood clot, he sat for a long time on the patterned wool rug of the yurt floor. He looked at the small infant in Holan's arms. He breathed slowly. At last he said in his soft, careful voice, "Let his name be Temujin." Holan lifted her gentle dark eyes from the boy. She did not answer at first. After a long quiet moment she said only, "Then it is Temujin," and so the boy was named. Yesugei sat for a long while beside her on the patterned wool rug. He looked at the small infant. He looked at his wife. He looked at the small dark blood clot in the open palm of the midwife's weathered hand. He said very softly, "He is small." Holan lifted her gentle dark eyes. She said only, "He will grow." He said, "He is very still." She said, "He is listening. He has listened since the 3rd hour of the night. I felt him listening." He said, "What does the small one listen for?" She said, "I do not know yet, my husband. The small ones listen for what the rest of us have stopped hearing." He said, "Then we will not crowd him. We will let him listen." She said, "Yes." The midwife laid the small infant very carefully back in his mother's arms. She said, "My lord, my lady, the clot is a great sign of the old songs, but the old songs do not always say what kind of greatness. The old songs only say that the small fist will hold what it holds. You must not press the small fist for what it is holding. You must let the small fist open in its own time." Yesugei said only, "Yes, mother, we will not press the fist. The midwife stood up very slowly. She walked to the open flap of the yurt. She looked out at the soft amber early morning light beginning to fall on the open felt floor at her feet. She said very softly, "The wind is good, my lord. The wind is from the east this morning. The east is a good wind for a boy of the upper Anon." She walked out. The flap fell behind her. The slow blue smoke of the small dried argyle fire rose very slowly to the open hole at the apex of the yurt. The small infant did not cry. He listened. The small encampment of his father's clan in those first years of his life lay in a soft fold of grass between two slow steppe streams, near the place that the Mongols of the upper Anon called Deliun Boldum, which means in the old language a small heart-shaped hill rising alone from the open steppe. The hill is still there today. It rises about 30 metres from the soft green-gold floor of the steppe, and the slow Onon River runs perhaps 1,000 paces to the east of it, and on summer afternoons the wind comes down off the Khenti mountains in long slow waves, and the grass of the hill turns silver and then green-gold, and then silver again as the wind moves across it. It is a quiet place. It is the place where a small Mongol noblewoman named Holun gave birth, in the early spring of the year 1162, to a small boy whose name would, in the slow course of the next 860 years, be written in more languages than any other man's name in the long history of the world. Temujin grew slowly, the way the children of the steppe grew. He was placed, as was the custom of the Borjigin Mongols, on the back of a small shaggy steppe pony before he could walk. His mother held him in front of her on her own saddle when he was still in swaddling. By the time he was 3, he could sit a small pony alone, with his small hands gripping the woven horsehair reins and his short dark braid bouncing very gently against the back of his small, faded blue-grey deal. By the time he was 4, he was given his first hunting bow. It was a small horn and bone child's bow, perhaps 2/3 his own height, and the string was a thin twist of horsehair, and it could only just send a small willow arrow 10 paces. He drew it for the first time on a soft, warm, late spring afternoon in the small herb pasture below the family yurt. He stood with his small thin legs apart in the soft green-gold grass, and he lifted the bow, and he drew it, and his small face was lifted in a slow, steady concentration that his mother Holun, watching from the threshold of the yurt with her hand on the soft, worn wool of her deal, would remember for the rest of her long life. The arrow flew. It did not go far. It fell in the grass, perhaps 8 paces from where he stood. He walked over to it slowly. He bent down. He picked it up. He turned around. He walked back to where he had been standing. He drew the bow again. He let the arrow fly. It went perhaps 9 paces. He bent down again. He picked it up. He drew it. He let it fly. He did this, slowly, carefully, methodically, until the sun had moved a long arm across the green-gold pasture, and Holun called him in for the evening bowl of warm mutton broth. He came in. He laid the small bow on the patterned wool rug beside the bed platform. He ate his broth. He did not speak much. He never spoke much. He was, his mother would say long afterward, in the small sworn testimony of the old Mongol chronicle, a child who watched. A child who watched and waited and listened and only spoke when he had something to say. He had brothers and a sister. Holun bore his 3 full brothers in the years that followed. Kasa, who would grow into the strongest archer of all of Yesugei's sons, with arms like a young pine tree. Kachiun, the gentle middle one, who was always quietest in the family ring, and Temuge, the youngest, who was still a small infant when their father died. There was also a sister, Temulun, the youngest child of all, who was barely a year old in the autumn that the world would change for them, and there were 2 half-brothers, the sons of Yesugei's second wife Sochigal, Bekta, who was about Temujin's own age, perhaps a year younger, and Belgute, who was a year younger still. So they were 7 children of one father, in 2 yurts of the same encampment, sharing one clan, 2 mothers, one common steppe. The summers of his earliest childhood were long and soft and gold. The autumns were short and copper-leaved along the Onon. The winters were very hard. The wind came down from the north in long, slow howling sheets in January and February, and the snow drifted high against the felt walls of the yurts, and the small fires of dried dung burned all day and all night in the iron braziers at the centre of the floors, and the small children slept 4 and 5 together under heavy heaped sheepskins on the low wooden bed platforms, with their small cold feet pressed against one another for warmth. He learned to ride a horse before he learned to read, because the Mongols of his clan did not yet read. He learned to draw a bow before he learned to write his own name, because there was no one in his clan to teach him to write it. He learned to stalk a marmot in the long summer grass before he learned a prayer, because the prayers of the steppe in those years were not prayers of words but slow, careful gestures of the hand laid on the heart and lifted to the open sky and to the everlasting blue heaven, the Tengri, the great soft blue dome over everything. He was 9 years old in the summer of 1171. By that summer he had grown thin and quick. His face was already lengthening into the face of a steppe man. His dark eyes were already deep-set and steady. He could ride a small steppe pony at a hard gallop without holding the reins. He could draw a small horn-and-bone bow that no longer sent its arrows 10 paces but 100. He was, his half-brother Belgute would say long afterward, the still child of the encampment. The child you would forget was sitting at the edge of the firelight until you turned and saw him watching. In the late summer of that year, his father Yasuge made the long ride west to the country of the Ongirat, who were a Mongol clan of the western steppe, who lived along the marshy shore of the great salt lake Buer-Nur, and who had a custom of marrying their daughters to the sons of Khans of other Mongol clans. Yasuge rode with Temujin behind him on a folded cloak. They rode for 9 days. They reached the encampment of an Ongirat man named Desa Chen, who was a herder of perhaps 40 horses, and who had a daughter named Berta, who was 10 years old that summer, with long, dark, glossy hair already pinned in 2 thick braids over each shoulder, under a small, pointed felt headdress, and with deep brown eyes and with a soft, careful, weathered tan complexion from the long open sun of the steppe. Daisechen welcomed Yasuge. They sat together in the central felt yurt of the encampment in the soft amber light of a late summer afternoon, and they drank slow, careful bowls of fermented mare's milk, and they spoke slowly of the world. Yasuge said, "I've brought my eldest son. I would have him meet your daughter." Daisechen called the child Berta into the yurt. She came in. She knelt at the threshold. She bowed her small, dark braided head. Yasuge looked at her for a long moment. He looked at his own son Temujin, who was sitting cross-legged beside him on the patterned wool rug, very still, his deep dark eyes lifted slowly to the small girl at the threshold. Yasuge said, very softly, "She has fire in her face. She has light in her eyes. She is the one." Daisechen said, "She is yours, if you will have her." It was agreed. It was the way the steppe agreed these things in those years. The 2 children would be promised. Temujin would stay at the Ongirat encampment for a year or 2, as a boy fiancé in his father's wife's family, as was the steppe custom, learning the ways of his bride's clan. Yasuge would ride home alone. Yasuge left him there at the soft pale dawn of the next morning. He bent down to the small thin shoulder of his 9-year-old son, and he laid his weathered hand there for a long moment, and he did not say much, only, "Be careful, my son. Watch the dogs. The dogs in this camp do not know you. Do not let them frighten you." Temujin looked up at his father. He nodded once, slowly. Yasuge said, "I will come back for you when the snow has come and gone twice." Temujin nodded again. Yasuge mounted his horse. He rode out of the encampment. Temujin stood at the threshold of Daisechen's yurt, in his small faded blue-grey deal, with his small thin hand laid carefully on the wooden doorframe, and he watched his father ride away, and he did not move for a long while after the dust had settled. This is the moment in the slow story where we must pause, because what happened next is the moment that turned the rest of his life. Yasuge rode home alone. 3 days later, on the 3rd day's ride east of the Ongirat country, near the slow, shallow valley of a small steppe river, he came upon a small encampment of 3 felt yurts. There were perhaps 9 men around the fire. They were Tatars. They were the old enemies of his clan. He did not know them in the soft amber light of the late afternoon, but they knew him. They knew him from the long, slow raid he had led against them 7 months earlier. They knew the shape of his shoulders and the line of his thick, dark beard, but they did not raise a sword. They did not raise a bow. The custom of the steppe in those years held that a single rider arriving at a peaceful encampment must be given food and drink, and a place by the fire and a night's safe rest. Yasuge was a tired man on a long road. He sat down beside the fire. He took the small wooden cup that was passed to him. He drank from it. He thanked the men who had passed it. He did not see, in the soft amber light of the late afternoon, the slow, careful exchange of glances around the fire. He did not see the slow, careful tilt of the cup as it was filled. He did not know that something thin and pale and bitter had been stirred into the fermented mare's milk before it was passed to his hand. He drank. He thanked them. He slept that night in a borrowed felt yurt. He rode on at the soft pale dawn. By the second day of his ride he was very ill. His weathered tan face was hollowed out by sweat. His broad, steady shoulders were bent over the saddle. He could no longer drink. He could no longer eat. By the third day he could no longer ride alone, and a passing herder from a neighbouring clan led his horse for him, slowly for the last long miles toward the small heart-shaped hill at Deliun Boldut. They reached his own encampment at the cool blue dusk of the fourth day. Herlin came running out of the central yurt in her faded blue-grey deal. She saw him on the horse. She saw the colour of his face. She did not weep. She lifted him down with the help of two of the herders. She carried him into the yurt. She laid him on the low wooden bed platform. She drew the heavy grey wool blanket up over him. She knelt beside him for the rest of the long blue evening, and through the long cold night, and into the cool grey light of the next morning, holding his weathered hand and laying soft, cool, damp cloths on his burning forehead, and not weeping. He died on the morning of the third day after they had brought him home. He spoke to her once before he died. He spoke very softly. He said only, "Send for the boy. Send for Temujin. The boy must come home." She nodded. She lifted his weathered hand very carefully to her cheek. She said very softly, "I will send for him, my husband. He will come. He is the eldest. He will come home." He said, "Tell him I am sorry I will not see him grown." She said, "He will know it without telling. He listens. He has listened since the third hour of the night he was born." Yasuge breathed very slowly. He said, "Tell him to hold the small ones. Tell him that the wind is from the east this morning, and that the east is a good wind for a boy of the upper Onon." She said, "I will tell him." He said, "Tell him also that the curved sabre is his now. The sabre and the small leather scabbard, the sabre and the small worn cup, the sabre and the small bag of pressed black tea by the bed platform, the sabre and the 5 horses, the sabre and the small flock of goats. Tell him these are the things of his father. Tell him to hold them as the heel of his hand." She said, "I will tell him." He said, "And tell him not to weep." She said, "He will not weep. He has not wept since the third hour of the night he was born." He closed his weathered eyes very slowly. He said only, very softly, "Yes, I knew. I knew when I lifted him from your arms in the soft amber light. I knew the small one would not weep." He breathed once. He breathed twice. She sent the rider that same hour. The rider rode west. The rider reached the Ongirat encampment at the cool grey light of the 7th day after Yasuge had passed through it. Desa Shen received the message. He turned to the small boy in the faded blue-grey deal who was sitting cross-legged at the edge of his fire, helping to mend a small leather bridle. He laid his weathered hand on the small thin shoulder of the boy. He said very softly, "Your father has died, my son. You must go home." Temujin looked up at him. His face did not change. He set down the small leather bridle. He stood up slowly. He said only, "I will come back for her one day." Desa Shen nodded. He gave the boy a horse and a small leather travelling pouch and a folded grey wool cloak. The boy mounted the horse. He rode east. He reached his father's yurt at the cool blue dusk of the 4th day's ride. He did not go into the yurt at first. He stood for a long while at the threshold in the soft pale evening light, with his small thin hand laid carefully on the wooden door frame, the way he had stood when his father rode away 2 months before. Then he went in. His mother Holan was kneeling on the patterned wool rug at the foot of the bed platform. The body of his father lay on the platform under the heavy grey wool blanket. The small dried dung fire had fallen low at the centre of the floor. The slow blue thread of smoke was thinning at the apex of the yurt. Temujin walked very slowly to the bed platform. He knelt beside it. He looked down at the still face of his father. He did not weep. This is the first turning point in his long life. He did not weep. He stood up after a long while. He walked out of the yurt. He walked across the soft-tilled earth of the encampment, past the cooking fires of the watching herders, past the small, low-rounded shapes of his uncle's yurts. He came to the edge of his father's small herd of horses. There were perhaps 15 of them. They were standing in the long, dry grass at the soft, cool dusk of an early autumn evening, their tails turning very slowly in the soft, cool wind, their heads lowered to the grass. Temujin sat down at the edge of the herd. He folded his small, thin legs under him. He laid his father's curved sabre. which Holun had set into his hands as he had walked out of the yurt, very carefully across his knees. He looked at the horses. He did not move. He sat there for the rest of that day. He sat there through the long, cool blue dusk. He sat there into the cold blue night, when the great wash of stars came out across the dome of the sky, and the soft, warm yellow squares of yurt flap firelight glowed in the deep middle distance behind him. He did not move. He did not weep. He did not call out. He did not pray. He only watched the horses move very slowly in the long dry grass at the edge of his father's last camp. Herlun came out of the yurt once, in the cool blue light of a deep middle hour of the night. She walked slowly to where he sat. She did not speak to him. She laid a heavy grey wool blanket over his small, thin shoulders. She knelt beside him for a long while. At last she said very softly, "You may come in when you are ready, my son." She walked back to the yurt. He came in at the soft, pale dawn of the next morning. The horses were still moving very slowly in the long, dry grass. His face had not changed, but something inside him had set, the way the iron of a slow, worked sabre is set in the cold water of a winter river. The boy who walked back into the yurt at the soft, pale dawn of that morning was no longer a child. He was something the steppe had not yet given a name to. He was a steppe boy in a faded blue-grey deal with a curved sabre laid carefully across his thin shoulder, and his deep dark eyes gone very still and very steady. He walked into the yurt. He laid the sabre on the patterned wool rug. He knelt beside his mother on the cold stone floor at the foot of the bed platform. He laid his small thin hand on her bowed shoulder. He said only, "Mother, the horses are still there." She lowered her face into her hands, and at last she wept. He knelt very still beside her on the cold patterned wool rug for a long quiet while. After a long while she lifted her gentle dark eyes very slowly. She said very softly, "My son, the clan will leave us." He said, "I know, mother." She said, "How do you know?" He said, "I have watched them. I have watched their faces. The men of Targetai Kirilth do not look at me. The men of Targetai Kirilth do not look at you. They look only at the small herd of horses. They look only at the small flock of goats. They look only at the threshold of the central yurt." She said, "Yes, that is how it begins." He said, "Mother, what will we do?" She said, "We will live, my son. We will live." He said, "How will we live, mother?" She said, "We will live the way the small ones live. We will live the way the marmots live in the long winter. We will live by listening. We will live by gathering. We will live by holding one another." He said, "Yes, mother." She said, "Promise me one thing, my son." He said, "Anything, mother." She said, "Promise me that you will not let the small ones eat the heel of their own hand. Promise me that you will not let your brothers turn against one another. Promise me that you will hold them. Promise me that. Promise me only that." He said only, very softly, very flatly, "I promise, mother." She laid her thin, weathered hand very carefully on his small, thin shoulder. She said only, "Then it is enough, my son. It is enough." In the days that followed, the clan came to bury him. They wrapped his body in a long, fine-grained sheepskin shroud, and they laid him in a small clearing of the soft-turned earth at the foot of the small heart-shaped hill of Deliun Boldum, and they covered the small clearing with stones, and they covered the stones with the soft new earth of the autumn rain, and they let the slow grass grow back over it. The summer he had ridden out to find his son a wife had been the last summer of his life. He was 38 years old. He had lived a hard, fast life under the open blue sky of the steppe, and he had been killed by a small, thin, pale poison in a small wooden cup of fermented mare's milk, and he was buried beside the small, slow river in the soft, tilled earth of the country he had ridden across his whole life. And in the days after the burial, the clan came one by one to Holun's yurt. They came with their small, careful gifts of dried mutton and bricks of pressed black tea and small worn wooden bowls. They sat in the soft amber light of the late afternoon. They drank a slow, careful cup of mare's milk. They lowered their heads. They did not look her in the eye. By the end of the second week, the elder of the Taichiud clan, an older man named Targetai Kirilth, who had been Yesugei's second cousin and who had quietly resented Yesugei for many years, came to her yurt one cool grey morning and stood at the threshold and did not enter. He said very flatly, "Holun, the clan is moving. The grass is gone here. We are striking the encampment in the morning. The clan rides east tomorrow at the soft pale dawn. We will not wait for women and children." Holand stood up from the patterned wool rug where she was kneeling beside her small daughter, Temujin. She walked slowly to the threshold of her yurt. She looked at Targutai Kirilth in the cool grey light of the late autumn morning. She said only, "You would leave a widow and her children alone on the open steppe in the deep autumn?" Targutai Kirilth did not answer. He turned. He walked back to his own yurt. The next morning, in the long cold blue light of the steppe dawn, the clan struck their encampment, and the long slow line of perhaps 100 mounted Borjigin and Taichud Mongol riders moved slowly away from the small heart-shaped hill of Delyun Boldo, and they left Holand and her 7 children alone in 2 small felt yurts beside the slow Onon River, with 5 horses and a small flock of goats, and a small pile of dried mutton and a small bag of pressed black tea, and 1 curved sabre laid carefully across the patterned wool rug of the central yurt. Holand stood at the threshold of her yurt and she watched them go. She did not call after them. She did not weep. She watched until the long, slow line of riders was a small dark thread on the deep horizon of the cold autumn morning. Then she turned. She walked back into the yurt. She knelt down at the foot of the bed platform. She laid her thin, weathered hand on the small, thin shoulder of her oldest son. She said very softly, "Temujin, we must learn to live." And so they learned. The years that followed were the hardest years of his long life. We will pass through them slowly, because they are the years that made him. They were the years between the cold autumn of 1171, when the clan struck their encampment and rode away, and the cold winter of 1178, when he came down off the small heart-shaped hill of Delyun Boldo as a married man of 17 and rode west to find the daughter of Daesashen who had been promised to him at the age of 9. 7 hard years. We will breathe through them slowly. The first winter was the hardest. Holand took her 7 children and her 5 horses and her small flock of goats and her 1 curved sabre, and she rode them slowly 2 days' ride upstream along the Onon River into a soft green pocket of grass at the foot of the deep birch forest of the Khenti Mountains. She raised her 2 small felt yurts in a slow, careful ring there. She put the goats in a small woven willow pen. She stabled the 5 horses in a small lean-to of birch poles and felt. She laid down the small remaining stores of dried mutton and pressed black tea. She sat down at the patterned wool rug of the central yurt that first cold blue evening, and she gathered her 7 children around her in the soft red glow of the small dried dung fire, and she said to them very softly, "Children, there is no clan around us anymore. There is only us. We must work together. We must hunt. We must gather. We must keep the goats. We must keep the horses. We must keep one another. There is no one else." She did the work that her husband had once done. She rose before the soft pale dawn. She walked out into the cold birch forest with a small woven willow basket over her arm, and she dug the pale onion roots and the small bitter wild garlic and the small hard winter berries of the rowan tree, and she came back at the soft amber light of the late afternoon with the basket half full. She gutted the small marmots that her sons brought her in the evening, and she stretched their small fur skins on the willow frames, and she boiled the small bones for the long slow broths of winter. She slept 3 hours a night for the first 3 months. She did not weep again in front of her children. The Mongols of the Upper Onon, who would later sing of her in the careful preserved oral songs of the secret history, would say of her in those years that her hood strings were never untied, that her sash was never loosened, that she fed her children on roots and small game, and on the soft, warm milk of her own slow, careful courage, and that the small heart-shaped hill of Delyun Boldo in those long, hard winters was held up by a woman of no clan and no friends and no army, alone with 7 children and 1 curved sabre laid carefully across the patterned wool rug. The boys grew. They grew thin and quick and hard. By the time Temujin was 11, he could ride a small steppe horse at a hard gallop for an entire morning without stopping. He could draw a long horn and bone bow that sent a slim feathered arrow 200 paces. He could spear a small swimming steppe carp in the slow black ice hole of a winter river. His brother Kassar was 9 years old that winter and could already shoot better than any man of his clan. His half-brother Bekta was about 10 and a half, and Bekta was strong, perhaps stronger than Temujin, and Bekta was bold, and Bekta, in the slow, long winter evenings inside the central yurt, would sit at the right hand of Temujin at the small low table where their mother Holland served the warm mutton broth, and Bekta would, in his quiet, careful, steady way, take more than his share of the bread, and take more than his share of the salt, and on one cool grey morning of the late spring of 1173, when Temujin was 11 and Bekta was 10.5, the trouble between them began to come up slowly into the open. It began with a fish. They had gone down to the slow black river that morning, the four of them, Temujin and Kasa on one side, Bekta and Belgute on the other, and they had each cut a small ice hole, and Temujin had drawn up a small slim silver-grey steppe carp on the end of his small willow line, and Bekta, sitting on the far side of the small ice hole, had reached over with his weathered young hand, and had taken the carp from Temujin's hand, and had said very flatly, "I will take this fish." Temujin had not answered. He had not moved. He had only looked, with his deep dark eyes gone very still, at his half-brother. Bekta had walked away with the fish. Later that same morning, the two boys went up onto the soft new grass of the spring meadow above the encampment, and Temujin had drawn his small horn and bone bow, and had brought down a small grey songbird with a single slim arrow. Bekta had walked over to where the small grey songbird had fallen. Bekta had picked it up. Bekta had said very flatly, "I will take this bird." Temujin had not moved. Bekta had walked away with the small grey songbird. That afternoon, the four boys came down to the threshold of the central yurt, and Temujin had said, very softly, in the soft amber light of the late afternoon, "Mother, Bekta has taken the fish. Bekta has taken the bird." Helen had lifted her gentle dark eyes from the small worn wooden bowl in her hands. She had said, very flatly, "We have only one another. We do not eat the heel of our own hand." She had said it twice. She had laid down the bowl. She had walked into the small willow pen of the goats. The trouble had been said aloud. It did not stop. Bekta took 2 more fish over the course of the next month. Bekta took a small marmot. Bekta took a small piece of cured horse meat from the small wooden box in the central yurt. And on the cool grey morning of a soft late spring day in 1173, Temujin walked very slowly out of the central yurt, with his small horn and bone bow over his shoulder, and Kasa walked behind him with a small horn and bone bow over his own shoulder, and they walked up onto the soft new grass of the small green meadow above the encampment, where Bekta was sitting alone on a low rock at the soft warm light of the late morning, watching a small herd of grazing horses. Temujin stopped at 20 paces. Kasa stopped at 15 paces. Bekta looked up. He saw the boughs. He did not run. He did not call out. He sat very still on the low rock, in his faded brown leather and fur deal, in the soft warm light of the late spring morning. He said only, very flatly, "I will not be the heel of your hand. I will not be that. But do not become a man who kills his brother for a fish and a bird. Do not become that man." Temujin lifted the bow. Kasa lifted the bow. The 2 slim arrows flew very slowly through the soft warm light of the late morning. Bekta slid sideways off the low rock into the soft new grass. He did not move again. They walked back down to the central yurt very slowly, the 2 of them, in the soft amber light of the late morning. Helen was sitting on the patterned wool rug, mending a small leather bridle. She lifted her gentle dark eyes. She saw the bows. She saw their faces. She saw what they had done. She set down the small leather bridle very slowly. She stood up. She walked across the patterned wool rug. She struck Temujin once, with the flat of her hand, hard, across his weathered young face. She struck Kasa once, with the flat of her hand hard across his weathered young face. She wept for the first time since the death of their father, for a long, slow while, kneeling on the patterned wool rug of the central yurt, and at last she said, very flatly, very slowly, in a voice that the 2 boys would carry with them every day of every year of the rest of their long lives, "You have killed your own brother. You have eaten the heel of your own hand. You have taken from us, in this small encampment of widows and children, the only thing we have. We have no clan. We have no friends. We have no army. We have only one another, and you have killed one another." She stood up. She walked out of the yurt. She did not speak to them again for 3 days. He carried that. He carried it. The Mongols of the Upper Onon would say later in the small, careful, sworn passages of the secret history that he had laid the killing of Bekta at the bottom of his own soul as a small, dark stone, and that the stone had stayed there for the rest of his 65 years, and that whenever, in the long hard years that came after, he had been tempted to spill the blood of one of his own brothers in council, or one of his own sons in council, or one of his own sworn captains in council, the small dark stone at the bottom of his soul had moved very slowly, and he had laid down the temptation, and had walked away from it, and had not killed. It was not a clean thing. It was not a beautiful thing. It was a hard thing he had taken into himself at the age of 11, on a soft late spring morning, on the soft new grass of a small green meadow above the slow Anon River, and it had stayed. That evening, when the cool blue dusk had at last fallen, and the small dried argyle fire was burning very low at the centre of the patterned wool rug, and Belgoutet was sitting very still on the low wooden bed platform, with his small thin face turned to the felt wall, Holen spoke to her 2 oldest sons. She said very softly, "Temujin, Kassar, come here, sit before me." They came. They sat cross-legged on the cold patterned wool rug at her knees. She said, "Look at me, my sons." They looked. She said, "What you have done today is the worst thing a Mongol can do. The Mongols of the steppe have many enemies. The Tatars are our enemies. The Merkits are our enemies. The Naiman are our enemies. The Taichi Ud are now our enemies. We have many enemies, my sons, but the worst enemy of a Mongol is not the Tatar. The worst enemy of a Mongol is not the Merkit. The worst enemy of a Mongol is the Mongol himself, when he turns the long horn and bone bow against the heel of his own hand. Do you hear me?" They said very softly, "Yes, mother," she said. "When you have eaten the heel of your own hand, you cannot grasp anything. You cannot hold a horse's reins. You cannot draw a bow. You cannot lift a small wooden bowl of mutton broth. You cannot hold a wife. You cannot hold a child. You cannot hold a clan. Do you hear me?" They said very softly, "Yes, mother," she said. "Bekta is dead. Bekta is buried under the soft new grass of the meadow. Bekta cannot come back. Belgoutet has lost his only full brother. Sochigel has lost her oldest son. The yurt of Sochigel is empty tonight. Do you hear that emptiness?" They said very softly, "Yes, mother." She said, "You will carry this for the rest of your long lives. You will carry it. You will not put it down. You will not be allowed to put it down. The night will come, when you are old men, and you will sit at the long evening fire of your own great central felt yurt, and you will look across the long evening at the long, careful faces of your sworn captains, and the small dark stone of this evening will move very slowly at the bottom of your own soul, and you will remember Bekta, and the small grey songbird, and the small slim silver-grey steppe carp, and the cool grey light of this morning. Do you understand me, my sons?" They said very softly. "Yes, mother," she said. "Then go. Sleep. Tomorrow you will hunt. Tomorrow you will gather. Tomorrow you will hold the small ones. Tomorrow you will begin to live the rest of your long lives carrying what you have done. Now go." They went. They lay down on the low wooden bed platform beside Belgoutet. They did not speak. They lay very still. They did not sleep for a long quiet while. The summers that followed were long. The winters were hard. By the time he was 13, he could lead a clan hunt of his own brothers. By the time he was 14, he had grown nearly to the height of a man. He was lean. He was steady. His deep dark eyes were already the eyes that the Persian chroniclers of Khwarezm, 50 years later, would describe as having a strange slow weight, like the weight of a cool dark stone at the bottom of a slow step river. The Taichi Ud clan, which had abandoned them, watched him grow. Tayutai Kirilth, the elder of the Taichi Ud, watched him grow. And Tagutai Kirilth, in the long soft summer of 1176, when Temujin was 14 years old, decided that he could no longer watch the boy grow. He came down out of the eastern steppe on a soft cool dawn of late summer with 30 mounted men. He came to the small encampment at the foot of the small heart-shaped hill. He surrounded the 2 felt yurts. He called out into the soft cool dawn, "Holen, send out the boy Temujin, the boy alone. We will not harm the rest of you. We will only take the boy." Holen stood at the threshold of the central yurt in her faded blue-grey deal. She did not answer. She did not move. Inside the yurt, Temujin laid down the small leather bridle he was mending. He stood up slowly. He walked to the threshold. He laid his thin, weathered young hand on his mother's shoulder for a long, quiet moment. He said only, very softly, "Mother, they will burn the yurts if I do not go. I will go." She lowered her face. She did not answer. She did not weep. He walked out into the soft, cool dawn alone. They put a heavy wooden kange of 2 flat planks fastened around his neck. They led him east on a small lead rope behind a Taichi-ud horse. They rode east for 2 days. They reached the great Taichi-ud encampment on the soft, warm light of the 3rd day. Tahutai Kirilth told his men, "Keep the boy in the kange. Move him from yurt to yurt every night. Let no man become careless. He's a small, dark stone. He will sink quietly to the bottom if we keep our hand on him." They did. He was kept in the kang. He was moved from yurt to yurt every night. He was kept there for many months, through the long late summer, through the cool brief autumn, into the cold beginning of the deep winter. He did not speak. He did not call out. He did not weep. He sat very still in the kange. He watched the dogs. He watched the horses. He watched the slow, patterned movement of the Taichi-ud in their daily rounds. He saw, after many weeks of careful watching, that on the warm summer night of the festival of the red fire moon, when the Taichi-ud held their long feast and their slow dance under the open blue sky, and every man and every woman of the clan was outside at the long fires, the watch over his small wooden kang would fall to a single tired older man, a 50-year-old Taichi-ud servant named Sorkan Shira, of broad-weathered build, with long greying hair tied back, with kind, tired, dark eyes, in a faded brown wool herder's deal. Sorkan Shira, in the long days of the slow summer, had passed Temujin's yurt 3 or 4 times, and each time he had paused, and he had laid a small piece of warm bread on the patterned wool rug at the boy's knee, and he had said only very softly, "Eat, my son, the night is long," and he had walked on. Temujin had watched him, on the soft, warm night of the festival, when the long fires were lit at the centre of the encampment, and the Taichi-ud were dancing in their slow circles, and Sorkan Shira was sitting alone on a small wooden stool at the threshold of the boys' holding yurt. Temujin spoke to him for the first time. He said only very softly, "Father Sorkan, I have watched you. You are a kind man. Help me." Sorkan Shira did not answer at first. He turned. He looked at the boy in the kange in the cool blue light of the late summer evening. He looked at the boy's deep, dark, steady eyes. At last he said very flatly, "Boy of Yesuge, why should I help you? Tagutai Kirilth is my Khan. I have eaten his salt. I have drunk his arag. I have slept under the felt of his yurts. Why should I help you?" Temujin lifted his deep, dark, steady eyes very slowly. He said only, very softly, very flatly, "Because, Father Sorkan, I have watched you also. I have watched you pass 3 times. I have watched you lay a small piece of warm bread on the patterned wool rug at my knee. I have watched you say, 'Eat, my son. The night is long.' A man who lays bread at the knee of an enemy boy is not a man who eats his salt. A man who lays bread at the knee of an enemy boy is a man who has not yet decided whose he is. I am asking you only to decide." Sorkan Shira looked at him for a long quiet while. He said, "I have 2 sons. I have 2 sons of my own. If they catch you, they will kill my 2 sons before they kill me." Temujin said, "I will not be caught, Father Sorkan. I will lie down in the long deep grass of the willow thicket. I will not move. They will pass over me with their long willow rods. They will not see me." Sorkan Shira said, "How do you know that they will not see you?" Temujin said, "Because I have watched them. They look for what is moving. They do not look for what is still. I will be still. I am very good at being still. I have been still since the 3rd hour of the night I was born." Sorkan Shira looked at him for a long quiet while in the cool blue light of the late summer evening. At last he said very flatly, "If they catch you, they will kill me and my sons. If they catch you, I am a dead man and my house is finished. Do not be caught." Temujin nodded once. He said, "I will not be caught, Father Sorkan. I will not be caught." Sorkan Shira said, "And if you live, boy of Yesuge, if you grow into a man, if the small dark stone at the bottom of your soul becomes a great Khan of the open steppe?" Temujin said, "Then I will remember, Father Sorkan. I will remember the small wooden wedge under the iron pin of the kangway. I will remember the cool blue light of this evening. I will remember the kind, tired, dark eyes of a Taichi-ud servant who had not yet decided whose he was. I will remember," Sorkan Shira said only, "Yes." He nodded once. Sorkan Shira reached down. He slipped a small wooden wedge under the iron pin of the heavy wooden kang. The kang fell open. Temujin stood up. Sorkan Shira pointed silently with his weathered hand at a small willow thicket beyond the southern edge of the encampment. Temujin walked very slowly into the soft, cool dusk. He did not run. He did not turn his head. He walked. Once he was past the last yurt, he ran. He ran for the willow thicket. He lay down in the long, deep grass of the willow thicket. He did not move. The Taichiud searched for him for 3 days. They beat through the willow thickets with long willow rods. They came past Temujin twice. Each time the small thin face in the long deep grass did not move. Each time the willow rods passed over him and went on. On the 3rd day, in the cool blue dusk of a soft summer evening, the searchers gave up. They rode back to the encampment. Sorkan Shira slipped down to the willow thicket at the deep blue middle of the night. He carried a small leather water-skin and a small piece of warm bread and a folded grey wool cloak. He did not speak. He laid the things in the long grass beside the boy. He turned. He walked back to the encampment. Temujin lay still until the soft pale dawn. At the soft pale dawn he stood up. He drank the small leather water-skin to its last drop. He ate the small piece of warm bread very slowly. He folded the grey wool cloak across his thin shoulders. He walked west. He walked for 9 days. He came at last, at the cool grey light of a soft autumn morning, to the small 2-yurt encampment of his mother Holan at the foot of the small heart-shaped hill. He stood in the threshold of the central yurt. His mother lifted her gentle dark eyes from the bowl in her hands. She did not speak. She set down the bowl. She walked across the patterned wool rug. She gathered him in her thin weathered arms. He laid his weathered young face into the soft worn wool of her deal. He did not weep. He held her very tightly for a long quiet while. The years between his 14th and his 17th year were the slow-gathering years. He grew into the long, thin shape of a man. He gathered around him, very slowly, the small handful of friends who would later be his sworn captains. There was Bo-Orchu, a young Mongol of the Araluk clan, who came to him in the soft, warm light of a long summer afternoon, alone, on a small, dark steppe horse, when Temujin was 15 years old, and helped him to recover 8 stolen horses from a raiding party that had ridden away with them in the deep night, and would say later, in the slow, careful, sworn passages of the old Mongol chronicle, "From that hour I rode with him, and from that hour I never stopped." There was Jelme, a young Mongol of the Uriankai clan, given to him by his own father, who would later be the captain of his own night guard, and who would, in the long years to come, save the Khan's life more than once on the open battlefield by sucking the dark blood out of an arrow wound in the Khan's neck. There was Kassar, his full brother, who could draw a longer bow than any other man on the Upper Onon by his 15th year, and Kachyun and Temuga, his other full brothers, and Belgute, the half-brother whose own brother they had killed, who had nevertheless stayed with them, and who never spoke of it, and who carried the small dark stone of that cool grey morning at the bottom of his own soul in his own way, and who would, decades later, be one of the trusted commanders of the conquering Mongol horde. In the soft warm summer of 1178, when Temujin was 16 years old, he saddled his own small steppe horse one cool grey dawn, and he rode west, alone, for 9 days, across the slow rolling green-gold steppe, toward the encampment of Dei Sechen on the marshy western shore of the great Salt Lake Buernure. He had not been there in 7 years. He had not seen Dei Sechen in 7 years. He had not seen the small, dark-braided Ongirat girl who had been promised to him at the age of 9 in 7 years. He did not know if she was still living. He did not know if she had been promised to another. He did not know if Dei Sechen would even remember the soft, warm afternoon on which a tired Borjigin Khan had ridden into the small encampment with his 9-year-old eldest son. He rode west anyway. The old steppe word for what he was doing was not so much courage as it was going to the place where the thing was promised and waiting. He came to the encampment of Dei Sechen on the soft amber light of a late summer afternoon. He did not enter. He sat on his small steppe horse at the threshold of the central yurt, in his faded grey wool deal, with his thin young face very still under the soft warm sun. Dei Sechen came out of the central yurt. He was an older man now. His weathered tan was darker. His hair had gone half grey. He looked up at the lean boy on the small steppe horse. He did not speak for a long quiet while. At last he said very softly, very slowly, "It is the boy of Yesugei. It is the boy who said he would come back." Temujin nodded once. He dismounted. He laid his thin weathered hand on the wooden doorframe of the yurt. He said only, "Father Dei Sechen, I have come back, as I said I would." Dei Sechen took him into the yurt. He fed him a slow, careful meal of warm mutton broth and a small wooden bowl of fermented mare's milk. He sent for his daughter, Berta. She came in. She was 16 years old that summer. She was slim. Her long, dark, glossy hair was pinned in 2 thick braids over each shoulder, under a small pointed felt headdress, the way it had been pinned when she was 10. Her deep brown eyes were the same. The soft, careful, weathered tan of her face was a little deeper from 7 more years of open sun. She wore a fitted dark red silk deal with cream and gold trim, and a small pair of gold earrings, and a small disc of turquoise on a fine silver chain at her throat. She knelt at the threshold of the yurt. She bowed her dark braided head. She lifted her deep brown eyes very slowly to the lean boy at her father's right hand. She said only, very softly, "I have waited." Temujin lifted his deep dark eyes very slowly to her face. He said only very softly, "I have come." She said, "It has been a long time, my lord." He said, "It has been 7 winters." She said, "I counted." He said, "What did you count?" She said, "I counted the snows. I counted the spring rains. I counted the summer fires. I counted the long rides of my father's herders to the deep northern country and back. Each season I said to myself, the boy will come this season. Each season the boy did not come, and then I would say to myself, then the boy will come the next season." He said, "I would have come sooner. The Taichiud took me. The Merkits drove us into the deep northern forests. The grass was very thin in the 2nd winter. My father's clan abandoned my mother. I had 4 small brothers and a small sister to feed." She said, "I knew." He said, "How did you know?" She said, "The herders of my father pass through the upper Onon every spring. The herders of my father bring back the slow news of the steppe. I heard, every spring, of the boy of Yasugei who was sitting at the edge of his father's small herd of horses, very still, very steady, holding his mother's yurt up with his thin, weathered hand. I knew." He said, "I am sorry I made you wait." She said, "Do not be sorry. The waiting was its own thing. The waiting was the small dark stone at the bottom of my own soul. I learned to carry it. I would not give it back now." He said, "Will you come with me?" She said, "I have been ready for 7 winters." He said, "Then come." Dei Sechen, sitting at the foot of his small low wooden throne, his thin weathered hand resting on the carved wooden arm, lifted his deep dark eyes very slowly. He said, "My daughter, are you sure?" Berta said, "Father, I am sure." Dei Sechen said, "He has nothing. He has a small dark stone at the bottom of his soul. He has a mother of no clan and no friends and no army. He has 4 small brothers and a small sister. He has a curved sabre laid carefully across the patterned wool rug of his mother's yurt. He has a long, deep, dark, steady look. That is all he has." Berta said, "Father, that is everything he has. That is enough." Dei Sechen looked at her for a long quiet while. He looked at the lean boy in the fitted dark grey wool deal sitting cross-legged on the patterned wool rug at his right hand. He nodded once very slowly. He said only, "Then it is settled. The wedding will be tomorrow at the soft amber light of the dawn. Tonight you will sleep, my daughter. The slow, careful work of a wife's life begins tomorrow." The wedding was small. The wedding was quiet. There was no clan to celebrate them. Holun had ridden west with her remaining children, the day after Temujin had ridden out, in the slow long line of 2 felt yurts and 4 horses, and a small flock of goats, and a small bag of pressed black tea. They had all reached Dei Sechen's encampment by the soft, cool dusk of the 9th day. The wedding was held the next morning in the soft amber light of a late summer dawn. Dei Sechen gave Berta a long, fine sable cloak as a wedding gift, a heavy, gleaming, dark brown sable cloak that had taken her mother 3 winters to gather and to sew. Holun gave Temujin a small worn wooden cup of fermented mare's milk that had been her own husband Yasugei's small wooden cup. The bride and the groom drank from the small worn wooden cup together, in the soft amber light of the late summer dawn, and the slow, long ribbon of cooking smoke rose from the small fire at the centre of the central yurt, and the slow, soft wind of the upper Onon moved very slowly in the green-gold grass beyond the open flap of the yurt. They were married. They went to live in their own small white felt yurt, set up by Belgute and Bo Orchu, in a soft fold of grass near the encampment, with the heavy dark brown sable cloak laid carefully across the low wooden bed platform. He carried that sable cloak with him in the soft amber light of the next spring, when he rode east across the long rolling green-gold steppe to the encampment of the old Karaite Khan Togrul. The Karaite were the most powerful Mongol clan on the central steppe in those years. Togrul was a 60-year-old man of lean upright build, with long greying dark hair tied back, with deep-set dark eyes, in a fitted heavy crimson silk Karaite deal with gold trim and a pointed felt cap with a small silver disc. And he had been the sworn Anda, the blood brother son of Yasuge when Yasuge was alive. He had not seen Yasuge in 12 years. He had not seen Yasuge's children in 12 years. Temujin came to his great central felt yurt on the soft warm light of a clear late spring afternoon, in his fitted dark grey wool deal, leading a small string of 3 horses, with the heavy dark brown sable cloak folded carefully across the saddle-bow before him. He dismounted. He walked slowly into the great central felt yurt of the old Karaite Khan. He laid the heavy dark brown sable cloak very carefully on the patterned wool rug at the foot of the small low wooden throne. He knelt before Togrul. He said only, very softly, very slowly, "Father Togrul, you are the Anda of my dead father. I have brought you the cloak that my wife's mother gave to my wife. I lay it before you. I ask only that you remember my dead father, and that you allow me to call you my second father, and that you keep me under the wing of your great clan." Togrul did not speak at first. He looked at the sable cloak. He looked at the lean young Mongol kneeling on the patterned wool rug at his feet. He looked at the deep, dark, steady eyes of the boy. He laid his weathered hand on the small, thin shoulder of Temujin. He said, "Boy, lift your face. Look at me." Temujin lifted his face. Togrul said, "How old are you?" Temujin said, "I am 16, Father Togrul." Togrul said, "And how is your mother?" Temujin said, "She is well, she is steady. She has fed 7 children on roots and small game for 7 winters." Togrul said, "Yasuge used to speak of her. He used to say, 'My wife has the careful, patient eyes of a woman who could carry a clan if I were lost.' He was right. He always knew the women better than he knew the men." Temujin said, "Yes, father." Togrul said, "Tell me, boy, why have you brought me this cloak?" Temujin said, "Because, Father Togrul, the Mongols of the open steppe say that a man who comes empty-handed comes also empty-mouthed. I have brought what I have nothing else." Togrul said, "You have the eyes, boy." Temujin said, "What eyes, father?" Togrul said, "The eyes of your father, the eyes that listen, the eyes that wait, the eyes of a man who can be kept waiting, and who does not lose the steadiness of the looking. Yasuge had those eyes. You have them. The Mongols of the open steppe in years to come will know those eyes. They will follow those eyes. The eyes will be enough. Trust the eyes." Temujin said only, "Yes, father." Togrul said, "I will gather the people scattered from your father's clan. I will gather them and bring them to you. I will be your second father, my son." Temujin said only, "Thank you, Father Togrul." It was sworn. The Karaite took Temujin under their wing. It was in the deep summer of that same year, in 1178, that the Merkits came. The Merkits were a Mongol clan of the deep northern forest near the river Selenga. They had a long old grievance with the Borjigin clan. Many years before, when Yasuge was a young man, he had ridden west with his father and his brothers, and had taken a Merkit bride for himself by force on the road back from a long raid. Her name had been Herlun. She had been the betrothed of a Merkit man named Chiledu. Yasuge and his brothers had taken her, and Chiledu had ridden away weeping into the deep northern forests, and Herlun had become the wife of Yasuge, and had borne him 5 children, the oldest of whom was Temujin. The Merkits had not forgotten. The Merkits never forgot. In the deep summer of 1178, 8 months after Temujin's wedding, 300 mounted Merkit raiders rode south out of the deep northern forests at the soft pale light of an early morning, and they came down upon the small encampment of Herlun and Temujin and Berta and the 7 children, and they fell on the small ring of yurts in the cool grey light of the dawn. Temujin was the first to know. He came out of the yurt at the first sound of hooves, with his bow over his shoulder, and he saw the long, slow line of dark riders cresting the low rise to the north, and he understood at once. He turned. He went back into the yurt. He shouted for Herlun, for his brothers, for Boorshu, for Jelme. He said, "Mount the horses, mount everything, take the children. We ride south." They ran. They saddled the horses in the cool grey light of the dawn. They put Holon and the small children on the strongest horses. They put Baorchu's mother on a small mare. They mounted themselves. They rode south at a hard gallop. The Merkit raiders crashed into the small ring of yurts. They emptied them. They took everything. They took the dark brown sable cloak that had been Berta's wedding gift. They took the small worn wooden cup that had been Yesugei's. They took the curved sabre that had been laid for 7 years across the patterned wool rug of the central yurt. And they took Berta. She had not been able to mount in time. There had been 1 horse short. She had taken the slowest horse that remained, an old grey mare, and the old grey mare had stumbled in the soft, cool grass of the early morning, and the Merkits had taken her. They lifted her up onto the back of a tall, dark Merkit warhorse. They tied her wrists behind her with a length of soft, pale leather rope. They rode north into the deep forest with her, and the long, slow line of 300 raiders rolled away into the cool blue dawn, and Temujin, watching from a low ridge 8 miles to the south, with his deep, dark, steady eyes lifted very slowly toward the deep northern horizon, did not move, and did not speak, and did not weep. Baorchu rode up alongside him in the cool grey light of the late morning. He laid his weathered young hand on the thin weathered shoulder of his sworn brother. He said only, very softly, "We will get her back." Temujin lifted his deep dark eyes very slowly. He said only, very flatly, "Yes." Baorchu said, "How?" He said, "I will go to Togrul." Togrul was the Ander of my father. Togrul took the dark brown sable cloak from the patterned wool rug of his own throne. Togrul will give me the horseman. Baorchu said, "And if Togrul will not?" He said, "Then I will go to Jamuka. Jamuka is my Ander. Jamuka will give me the horseman." Baorchu said, "And if Jamuka will not?" He said, "Then I will ride alone. I will take 10 men. I will ride into the deep northern forest. I will find her." Baorchu said, "Then I will be one of the 10. Jelmi rode up alongside them. He said, "Then I will be a second of the 10. Kassa rode up alongside them. He said, "Then I will be a third of the 10. He looked at the 3 of them in the cool grey light of the late morning. He said only, very softly, very flatly, "I have heard you. I will not forget. But Togrul will give me the horseman. Jamuka will give me the horseman. We will ride together. We will get her back. We will not lose her. Hear me." They said, "We hear you." He rode that same week to Togrul. He rode for 5 days. He came to the great central felt yurt of the old Keret Khan in the soft amber light of a late summer afternoon. He knelt on the patterned wool rug at the foot of the small low wooden throne. He said only very softly, "Father Togrul, the Merkits have taken my wife. I ask you to remember the cloak. I ask you to remember the oath." Togrul did not speak for a long quiet while. At last he said, very flatly, "I will give you 20,000 horsemen. We will ride at the cool blue dawn of the new moon." He rode also to Jamuka. Jamuka was a young Mongol of the Jadaran clan. He was Temujin's sworn Ander. They had exchanged blood bones as small boys on the slow Onon River, and they had exchanged them again as young men a year before, on a long warm summer night after a long warm summer hunt. Jamuka was 26 years old that summer. He was lean, he was handsome, he was dazzlingly clever. He was, in the slow, careful sworn passages of the old Mongol chronicle, the cleverest commander of his own generation on the open steppe. He came when Temujin called. He brought 10,000 of his own Jadaran horsemen. They met the Karaite force on a low rise west of the river Hilok, in the cool blue dawn of the new moon, and the long, slow combined line of perhaps 30,000 mounted Mongol Karaite warriors moved north into the deep summer forest, and they fell on the Merkit encampments at the slow pale dawn of the 7th day, and they broke them, and they shattered them, and they drove the Merkit raiders into the deep northern forests in a long, broken slow trail of horses and dropped sabres and abandoned felt yurts, and Temujin himself, on a tall dark steppe horse, rode into the largest of the broken Merkit encampments, at the soft warm light of a clear summer noon, and he rode through the long broken rows of empty felt yurts, and he called out into the cool warm summer wind, "Berta, Berta, it is your husband, come out." From the threshold of the 3rd yurt on the left, in the soft warm summer light, a slim figure in a fitted dark red silk deal stepped out very slowly. She was thinner than she had been. Her long dark glossy hair was loosed of its braids and fell down her back. Her deep brown eyes were the same. She walked very slowly across the cool, warm summer grass. She did not run. She came to the side of his tall, dark steppe horse. She laid her thin, weathered hand on his knee. She lifted her deep brown eyes very slowly. She said only, very softly, "I have waited." He looked at her for a long, quiet while. He said very softly, "Are you well?" She said, "I am well, my lord." He said, "Are you hurt?" She said, "I am not hurt. I have been kept. I have not been hurt." He said, "Are you afraid of me?" She said, "I am not afraid of you. I have never been afraid of you. I was afraid only that you would not come." He said, "I would always come." She said, "I know, I knew." The herders of the merkits came in and out of the camp. The merkit women whispered around the cooking fires. They said, "The lean Mongol boy will not ride against the merkits. The lean Mongol boy has no army. The lean Mongol boy has only a small handful of sworn captains and a mother of no clan. The lean Mongol boy will not come for you, daughter of Desa Shen." They said it many times. I did not believe them, not once. He said, "Why did you not believe them?" She said, "Because I had watched you stand under the great oak in my father's garden when you were 9 years old. I had watched you ride out of my father's encampment alone with your father at the soft pale dawn of the next morning. I had watched the way you laid your small thin hand on the wooden door frame of my father's yurt before you mounted. I had watched the way you looked back at me from the saddle. I knew, even then, that you would come. I waited 7 winters for you to come the first time. I knew you would come the second time. I am not afraid of you. I have never been afraid of you. I have only ever been afraid that you would not come." He lifted her up onto the saddlebow before him. He laid his weathered young hand on the soft-worn dark red silk of her deal. He turned the tall dark steppe horse south. He rode out of the broken merkit encampment. They rode south together for the rest of that long, cool, warm summer afternoon. They did not speak. They rode in a slow, steady silence, the way 2 people ride when they know that what is between them does not need to be spoken yet, and that there will be many years for the slow, careful unfolding of it. They reached the new encampment of Holen on the soft, cool dusk of the 8th day. Holen came out of the yurt. She lifted Berta down from the horse. She gathered her in her thin, weathered arms. The 2 women held one another for a long quiet while in the cool blue dusk of the late summer evening, and Temujin stood beside the tall dark horse, with his weathered young hand on its long pale neck, and his deep dark steady eyes lowered, and he did not move. She was already pregnant. The slow rounding of her waist, in the soft cool light of that summer evening, was already beginning to show under the soft worn dark red silk of the deal. She had been with the merkits for nearly 9 months. The child she would bear in the deep summer of the next year would be a son. She would name him Joshi, which means in the old Mongol language guest, or the one who comes in. Whether the child was Temujin's own son, conceived just before the merkit raid in the cool grey dawn of an early summer morning, or whether the child was the son of the merkit warrior Chilga, the half-brother of the man whose betrothed had once been taken by Yasuge, was a question that the Mongols of the Upper Onon would whisper about for the rest of Temujin's long life, and that the historians of the world would dispute for the next 860 years, and that Temujin himself, in the long, careful, steady years of his marriage, would never, in any sworn passage of any chronicle of any of the languages of the world, allow to be raised in his presence. He raised the boy. He raised the boy as his own. He raised the boy as his eldest son. He stood at the boy's naming. He laid his weathered hand on the boy's small, thin shoulder, when the boy was old enough to hold a small horn and bone bow. He gave the boy his place in the long, slow ranks of the 4 sons of his great heart, and the 4 sons of his great heart were Yochi, and Chagatai, and Ogade, and Tolui, and they rode beside him for the rest of his 65 years. He never raised the question of the merkit raid. He never let it be raised. The Mongols of the Upper Onon would say later, in the slow, careful, sworn passages of the old chronicle, that no one had ever heard him speak of it, in any council, in any quiet evening, in any warm summer twilight. Whatever he had carried away from that long, cool, warm summer afternoon when Berta had walked out of the 3rd yurt on the left of the broken merkit encampment, he had carried it down quietly into the slow waters of his own long, deep silence, and it had stayed there. Berta herself, when she'd come down off the tall, dark steppe horse on the soft, cool dusk of that 8th day's ride, had folded her thin, weathered hand into Holen's thin, weathered hand, and had not spoken of the months in the deep northern forest, and had not spoken of the Merkit warrior Chilga, and had not spoken of the soft, slow rounding of her waist, and had only said very softly, in the cool blue light of the late summer evening, "Mother, I am home." Holen had lifted her gentle dark eyes. She had said only, very flatly, "Then it is enough, my daughter. It is enough." The years that followed were the long, slow years of the slow consolidation. They were the years between the late summer of 1179 and the cool blue dawn of the 1206th Great Kurultai on the Onon River. 27 years. We will move through them slowly, because they are the years that taught him to be a Khan of the open steppe. They were the careful years of the patient gathering of clans. He gathered them slowly. He gathered them one at a time. He gathered them sometimes by careful diplomacy, and sometimes by the slow opening of his own felt yurt door to a defeated rival clan chief who had no other place to go, and sometimes by the cool, careful, patient, steady weight of his own deep, dark, steady eyes across a council fire, and sometimes by the slow gathering of his small handful of sworn captains around him, who would say of him in the sworn passages of the old Mongol chronicle, "He fed his men first, he drank last, he gave the soft, warm sleeping place by the fire to the younger scout, he took the cold corner of the felt yurt for himself, he listened to every man in council, even the smallest, and he did not speak until every other man had spoken, and when he spoke, he said only what needed to be said, and then he was silent." Jamukha, his sworn Anda, his blood brother, was the first to leave him. They had ridden together through the long, bright autumn after the rescue of Berta, in the cool, soft autumn light of the rolling steppe, and they had become very close again, and they had sworn the Anda oath a third time, and they had pitched their two great central felt yurts together in a single ring of the encampment, and they had drunk from one wooden cup together at the slow, long evening fires. But Jamukha was a man who could not bear to ride beside another man for very long. Jamukha was a man whose long, careful, dazzling cleverness asked always for the first place at every fire, and Temujin, in the slow, careful unfolding of those long, bright autumns, was beginning to draw toward himself, very slowly, very quietly, the small, careful loyalties of the herders and the lesser clan chiefs and the watchful older women of the upper Onon, who came to him in their soft, cool dusk hours and laid their small, careful hands on his weathered young shoulder and said, "We will follow you. We will follow you when the time comes." Jamukha saw it. Jamukha did not bear it. On a soft, cool dusk of an autumn evening in 1181, on a long, slow ride in a soft, cool fold of grass between two slow steppe streams, Jamukha turned his tall, dark horse very slowly, and he said to Temujin, in his soft, careful, clever voice, "Anda, let us pitch our yurts in two rings tonight. Let your people pitch beside the river. Let mine pitch beside the high ground. The grass is better that way for our horses." Temujin did not answer at first. He looked very slowly at his sworn brother. He understood at once. He understood the soft, careful cleverness of the proposal. He understood that the dividing of the encampments meant the slow, careful dividing of the loyalties that had been gathering between them. He understood that Jamukha, with his careful, dazzling cleverness, had decided to put a small, careful test on the open steppe to see whose hand the loyalties would fall into. He nodded once. He said only, "Yes, Anda, as you say." That night he rode his small, careful column of Borjigin and Taichi-Ud and Ongirat herders down to the river. Jamukha rode his small, careful column of Jadaran herders up to the high ground. And in the cool blue dawn of the next morning, when the slow, careful ribbon of camp smoke rose into the soft, cool autumn sky, more than half of Jamukha's own Jadaran herders, with their wives and their children and their small flocks of goats, came down off the high ground in a slow, careful trickle, and pitched their small, low-felt yurts in the long, slow ring of Temujin's camp by the slow, cool river. Jamukha watched them come. Jamukha did not call them back. Jamukha understood, in the slow, careful weight of his own dazzling cleverness, that he had already lost. He turned his tall, dark horse very slowly. He rode away with the small handful of Jadaran herders who had stayed with him, into the deep autumn forests of the upper Onon. He did not speak to Temujin again for nearly 11 years. The slow, long shadow of that turning of horses on that soft, cool dusk of an autumn evening would eventually grow into the long, slow battle of the Black Forest, and into the slow, careful war of the central steppe, and into the cool blue dawn of the 1206th Great Cruelty. But at the time, on that soft, cool dusk of an autumn evening, neither of the two young men knew it. They only knew that the long, bright autumn of their second sworn Ander oath had quietly ended, and that they would not ride together again. The years between 1181 and 1201 were the years of the long, slow, patient gathering. We will not move through every battle, every council, every long winter of careful diplomacy, because there were many of them, and the slow, steady cadence of these years is the cadence of slow, steady accumulation. He gathered the Borjigin Mongols. He gathered the Taichiud Mongols, who had once driven him from his mother's yurt at the age of 9. He gathered the Ongirat Mongols, his wife's clan. He gathered the Kongirad. He gathered the Old Konut. He gathered the Kori. He gathered the long, careful loyalty of the Kerite Khan Togrul, who had been his second father, and whose great central felt yurt he visited each spring, and whose slow, careful blessing he asked at every great undertaking. He gathered the slow loyalty of the Naiman Khan in Anch Bilge, who held the high western steppe. He gathered in the careful winters the small, careful loyalty of the older women of his clans, who sat in their soft, warm yurts on the long, slow winter evenings, and said to one another, very flatly, "He is the man. He will be the man." He gathered the small, careful loyalty of the herders, who said to one another, very flatly, on the long, cool summer afternoons of the rolling steppe, "He fed us when the grass was thin. He gave us his own small wooden bowl. He shared his salt. He is the man." He was, in those long, slow, patient years, a man of slow, careful watchfulness. He rose before the soft, pale dawn. He drank a small, careful bowl of fermented mare's milk. He walked alone, in the soft, cool dusk hours, to the edge of the encampment. He stood for a long quiet while in the cool blue dusk light of the open steppe, with his thin weathered hand laid carefully on the wooden door frame of the central yurt, and he watched the slow movement of the long blue ribbon of cooking smoke rising into the soft cool evening air, and he watched the slow, careful return of the herders with the long, slow flocks of goats. He thought, in those long, quiet hours, of the slow, careful work that lay ahead of him. He thought of the slow, careful gathering of the rest of the Mongol clans. He thought of the slow, careful breaking of the long old enemies of his clan, the Tatars who had killed his father, the Merkits who had taken his wife, the Naiman who would in the end be the last great Mongol clan to be brought under his hand. He thought sometimes of the small dark stone at the bottom of his own soul, the stone of the killing of Bekta, and he thought sometimes of the long quiet patience of his mother Holen, who had taught him in the long hard winters of his 9th year that the only way through a hard thing was the slow, careful, steady walking through of it. Berta gave him sons. Yoki was born in the deep summer of 1179. Chagatai was born in 1183. Ugadai was born in 1186. Tolui was born in 1192. They grew. They grew up in the encampments of their father's rising clan. Yoki grew into a tall, lean, watchful boy with deep brown eyes and a quiet, even voice. He was not much like his father in face, but he was the eldest, and he was given the place of an eldest son, and he rode at his father's right hand on the long, slow autumn hunts. Chagatai grew into a hard, fierce, stubborn boy with sharp, dark eyes and a sharp, careful tongue. He was much like his father in feature but never in patience, and the slow, long, quiet quarrel between him and Yoshi over the question that had hung over Yoshi's birth would, in the long, slow years to come, never quite be settled. Ugadai grew into a soft, kind, broad, steady boy with a generous, slow, open face and a long, careful, open hand. He was the gentlest of the four, and his father, in the slow years to come, would name him as his successor for that very reason. Tolui grew into the youngest, the one who stayed nearest his mother's yurt, the one who married a young Christian woman of the Keret clan named Sokaktani Beki, and whose 4 sons would, in the long, slow centuries to come, divide the largest part of the Mongol world among themselves. Berta sat at the heart of all of it. She was the slow, careful keeper of the inner ring of the camp. She sat in the long, warm summer evenings with her women in the soft amber light of the central yurt, and she spun fine silver-grey wool, and she stitched the careful wedding gowns of her sons' brides, and she held the long, slow inner thread of the household together with her thin, weathered hand. in the cool grey light of an early autumn morning in 1201, on a long low rise of grass in the soft fold of the country called the Khalkhin Gol, a great slow battle was fought between Temujin and Jamuka. Jamuka had been gathering over the long slow years, the small careful confederacy of the clans that had not yet come under Temujin's hand, the deep northern Merkits, the western Naiman, the Taichiud who had returned to him in their old grievance, and a handful of smaller Mongol clans. And Jamuka had had himself acclaimed in the cool blue dawn of an early summer morning as the Gur-Khan, the universal Khan, of these gathered clans. He had ridden east in the deep summer with 30,000 horsemen. He had met Temujin's slowly gathering army on a long low rise of grass in the soft fold of the country called the Black Forest. The slow long battle had begun in the cool blue light of an early autumn dawn. The long slow lines of mounted horsemen had moved very slowly across the soft cool autumn grass. The long slim feathered arrows had begun to fall in slow steady arcs across the cool grey light of the morning. By the soft warm light of the late afternoon, the long slow battle had ended in a slow steady drawing back of Jamuka's lines into the deep birch forest at the edge of the rise. The dead and the wounded had been gathered by the work of the herders and the camp women into long slow rows on the soft cool autumn grass. It was in the cool blue light of the late afternoon, as the gathering of the wounded was beginning, that Temujin's tall white warhorse, a fine pale stallion that he had ridden through the long bright morning of the battle, fell very slowly into the long dry yellowing autumn grass, with a slim feathered war arrow lodged deep in its long pale neck. Temujin slid down off the saddle as the horse fell. He knelt beside the still warm body of the white warhorse on the soft cool autumn grass. He laid his weathered hand very carefully on the long pale neck. He did not move for a long quiet while. His sworn captains, gathered around him in a slow, careful ring, did not speak. At last Bo-Orchu said, very softly, "We will find the archer who shot him." Temujin lifted his deep, dark, steady eyes very slowly. He said only, very flatly, "Yes." They sent out the search through the broken lines of Jamuka's defeated army. They went tent to tent. They went horse to horse. They did not find him at first. By the cool grey light of the early evening, however, a young Mongol archer of perhaps 24 years, lean and wiry of build, with weathered tan complexion, with sharp dark eyes, with neat dark hair tied back, in a fitted faded grey-brown wool deal and a leather scout's cap, was found kneeling alone on the soft cool autumn grass at the foot of a small low rise, with his long horn and bone bow laid carefully across his thin small hands. He was brought before Temujin in the cool blue light of the late evening, in the long careful ring of the sworn captains, in the long slow soft amber light of the slow-turning campfires. Temujin looked at him for a long quiet while. The young archer did not lower his eyes. He looked steadily up into the deep dark steady eyes of the lean tall man on the slow careful camp stool above him. At last Temujin said very softly, very flatly, "Tell me, archer, whose hand drew the bow that shot the white warhorse?" The young archer did not answer at first. The careful ring of sworn captains did not breathe. At last the young archer said very softly, very flatly, "It was my hand, my lord. I drew it. I aimed for the rider. The horse turned. The arrow took the horse. If I had taken the rider, I would have taken him cleanly. I do not lie. If you wish my life is yours. But if you wish a man who can shoot, I am your man." The ring of sworn captains did not move. Temujin looked at the young archer for a long quiet while. He saw in the soft amber light of the slow-turning campfires the steady set of the young archer's thin shoulders. He saw the steady weight of the young archer's sharp dark eyes. He saw in the slow weight of his own deep dark steady eyes the slow, careful turn of his own heart. He stood up very slowly from the camp stool. He walked across the soft cool autumn grass to the kneeling young archer. He laid his weathered hand very carefully on the bowed shoulder of the young man. He said, "What is your name, archer?" The young archer said, "Jirgo Adai, my lord, of the Besud clan." He said, "And you say you aimed for the rider?" Jirgo Adai said, "I aimed for the rider, my lord. The horse turned. The arrow took the horse. I do not lie." He said, "Many men in the long broken lines tonight have not told me the truth. Many men have said, 'It was not my arrow, my lord. It was the arrow of a man on my left.' Many men have said, 'It was the arrow of the captain who fell at the 3rd hour of the morning.' Many men have said, "I do not know whose arrow it was, my lord. Why have you told me?" Djurgårdai said, "Because, my lord, if I had told you a lie, I would carry it for the rest of my long life. The small dark stone at the bottom of a man's soul is heavy enough without a lie added to it. I would rather give you my life clean than my long life dirty." He looked at the young archer for a long quiet while. He said, "Will you ride with me?" Djurgårdai said, "I will ride with you, my lord. If you will have me, I will ride with you to the deep western edge of the world. I will ride with you to the deep eastern shore of the great salt sea. I will ride with you wherever you send me. I will not come back until the arrow has flown." He said only, very softly, very flatly, "Then ride with me. From this day your name shall not be Djurgårdai. From this day your name shall be Jebi. Jebi is the old steppe word for the arrow. You will be my arrow. You will fly where I send you, and you will not come back until the arrow has flown." The young archer lifted his sharp dark eyes very slowly to the lean tall man above him. He said only, very softly, very flatly, "I am yours, my lord. I am the arrow." He stood up. He walked to the ring of the campfires. He took his place at the long, slow ring of sworn captains. The long, careful ring did not move. Boorchu lifted his small wooden bowl of fermented mare's milk to the young archer at the cool blue light of the late evening. He said only, very softly, very flatly, "Welcome, Jebe," and so he was renamed. And so he rode with the Khan of the Borjigin from that long, slow autumn day, in the cool blue light of the late evening of 1201, until the soft, cool light of an early summer afternoon in 1224, on the long, slow ride home from the great cavalry raid through the Caucasus and Russia, when his own slim, feathered arrow was sent ahead to the Khan with the message that he had done what was asked. 23 years of riding, 23 years of the slow, careful flight of the arrow, 23 years of the slow, careful weight of the steady weight of the long, slow, patient hand of the lean, tall man who had taken him from the dust of the cool blue evening of the Black Forest. The years between 1201 and 1206 were the careful years of the final consolidation. We will move through them slowly. The Tatars, the old enemies who had killed his father by poisoning a wooden cup of fermented mare's milk on a long old steppe road 30 years before, were broken in the long, cool autumn campaign of 1202 in a long, slow battle on the cool plains of Dal and Nemurj. The Karait, his second father's clan, were broken in the soft, cool autumn of 1203, in a long, sad, slow battle that began in misunderstanding and ended in the slow, careful death of the old Karait Khan Togrul, on the deep western edge of the steppe. Togrul, who had taken the dark brown sable cloak from the patterned wool rug of his own throne 25 years before, who had given his sworn second son 20,000 horsemen for the rescue of Berta, who had been the slow, careful, patient first protector of the long, slow career of the boy from the small heart-shaped hill of Delion Boldom, fled westward in the soft, cool dusk of an autumn evening, with a small handful of his own remaining horsemen, and was killed in the deep western forest by a Naiman patrol who did not recognize him, and his weathered grey head was brought back in a small wooden box to the great central yurt of his sworn second son, who looked at it for a long quiet while, and who set it down on a worn patterned wool rug, and who did not speak for the rest of that long, cool autumn evening, and who buried it himself in the cool grey light of the next dawn, in a small clearing of the soft turned earth at the foot of a low birch ridge, with his own thin weathered hand. The Naiman, the last of the great rival Mongol clans, were broken in the long, slow autumn of 1204, in a long, slow battle on the long high plain of the Altai range. Jamukha, his sworn Anda, his blood brother of 3 sworn oaths, who had ridden with the Naiman in their last broken stand, was taken alive by his own followers in the cool grey dawn of an autumn morning in 1205, and was bound by them and brought to Temujin in the soft amber light of a late autumn afternoon on the long, slow plain of the upper Onon. And Temujin had ordered his own followers killed for delivering up their own master, and had asked Jamukha to ride beside him as a sworn brother again, and had been refused, with the soft, careful, clever, steady weight of Jamukha's deep dark eyes, lifted very slowly across the slow ring of the campfires, and Jamukha had said only, very softly, very flatly, "There is one sun in the sky, Anda. There is one place beside it. You have taken it. Let me die." And Temujin had granted him the steppe death of a noble. death without the spilling of blood by the slow, careful breaking of the spine, and had buried him in a small clearing of the soft-turned earth at the foot of a low rise, with his own thin, weathered hand, in the cool grey light of the next dawn. The gathering of the central steppe was complete. In the deep summer of 1206, in the soft, warm light of a clear afternoon, on the gentle plain of the upper Onon River, the great Kurultai was held. It was the largest assembly that had ever gathered on the open Mongolian steppe. Hundreds of small white felt yurts were pitched in concentric rings on the long, slow plain. Thousands of mounted clan chieftains in lamella leather and silk-embroidered deals of every clan colour rode slowly in patterns around the central white felt dais. The long, slow blue smoke of 100 cooking fires rose into the warm late afternoon light. The slow, careful weight of the soft, cool summer wind moved very slowly across the green gold grass. He stood at the centre of the dais. He was 44 years old. He wore a fitted dark blue silk-embroidered deal with red and gold geometric trim at the cuffs and collar. He wore a leather belt with a worked silver buckle. A curved sabre hung at his left hip in a worked leather scabbard. A small carved horn and bone bow case hung at his right hip. A tall pointed black and red felt cap with a single eagle feather sat on his long dark hair, which was pulled back into a single thick braid. His weathered tan face was very still. His deeply set dark amber eyes were very steady. His neat dark brown moustache and small chin beard had been combed very carefully that morning by Berta, in the soft amber light of the dawn, with a small carved bone comb of her own grandmother's. The great white standard with 9 long horsehair yak tails, the tuff, the sacred banner of the Borjigin Mongols, the symbol of the clan sky and the open blue heaven of the steppe, was raised on a tall lacquered wooden pole behind him. Bert stood at his right shoulder, in a long high-pointed Bokta headdress with silver and turquoise plaques, and a fitted dark red silk deal with cream and gold trim. Her deep brown eyes, gone calm in the long, careful, steady years, lifted very slowly across the long, slow ring of the assembled clan chieftains. A great old shaman of the Borjigin, an old man named Teb Tengri, of long white braided hair and a long faded white deal, and a small worn iron amulet at his throat, stood at the foot of the dais. He lifted his thin, weathered hand very slowly into the soft, warm summer wind. He spoke into the warm afternoon air, in the long, old, slow, Mongol cadence of the careful sworn passages of the old chronicle. He said, "Eternal blue heaven has chosen you. Eternal blue heaven has set you over the people of the felt-walled tents. Eternal blue heaven has named you the Khan of Khans, the universal ruler. From this day your name shall be Genghis, from this day you shall be the Genghis Khan." And the long, slow ring of the assembled clan chieftains lifted their careful sabres very slowly in the soft, warm summer light, and they raised the slow step shout, and the slow, long, careful ribbon of the warm summer wind moved very slowly across the careful ring of the rising men, and the 9 long horsehair yak tails on the tall lacquered pole turned very slowly in the warm summer wind. He stood very still. He did not raise his weathered hand. He did not raise his deep, dark, steady eyes to the long, slow ring of the assembled clan chieftains. He turned his weathered tan face very slowly to the east. He looked east before he looked at any of them. He looked east, toward the deep, slow-rising shoulder of the sacred Birken Khaldun mountain, on the deep blue horizon of the soft, warm summer afternoon. He looked east, where the long, slow, patient, careful years of his own slow, careful life had begun. He looked east, where the small heart-shaped hill of Deliun Boldag lay on the soft green-gold grass of the upper Onon. He looked east, where his father Yesugei lay buried under the soft-turned earth of an autumn rain. He looked east, where his half-brother Bekta lay buried under the soft new grass of a small green meadow. He looked east, where the small 2-yurt encampment of his mother's long, hard winters had once stood. He looked east for a long, quiet while. He did not move. The long, slow ring of the assembled clan chieftains did not breathe. The slow, careful turning of the 9 long horsehair yak tails on the tall lacquered pole moved very slowly in the warm summer wind. Then, after the long, quiet while, he turned very slowly back to the long, slow ring of the assembled clan chieftains. He looked at them in the soft, warm summer light. He laid his thin, weathered hand on the worked silver buckle of his leather belt. He said only, very softly, very flatly, "It is enough. Let us begin." Berta at his right shoulder lowered her deep brown eyes very slowly. She said very softly, "Husband, you looked east." He said, "Yes." She said, "Why did you look east?" He said, "Because the small heart-shaped hill is east, because my father is east, because Bector is east, because the small two-yurt encampment of my mother's long hard winters is east, because Sorkenshira is east, because the great oak in your father's garden is east, because the cool grey morning when I walked back into the felt yurt is east, because everything that made the man who is standing on this dais today is east. I could not turn to the ring of the assembled clan chieftains until I had turned first to the east. I could not become the universal Khan of the open steppe until I had stood once more, very still, before the small dark stone at the bottom of my own soul." She said, "Yes, I knew you would." He said, "Did you?" She said, "I have known you for 37 years, my husband. I knew when you walked into my father's yurt at the age of 9 that you were the boy who would one day, before he turned to the world, turn first to the east. I have waited for this morning. I have waited the way I waited for you on the cool, warm summer afternoon at the Broken Merket encampment. I have waited the way I waited for you on the soft amber dawn of the wedding morning. I have waited, and I have known." He laid his thin, weathered hand very carefully on her soft, worn, dark red silk shoulder. He said only, very softly, very flatly, "Wife, without you, none of this." She said only, "Husband, without you, none of me. Now begin. They are waiting." And the great Kurultai was begun. It was on the cool blue dusk of that same evening, after the slow first day of the Kurultai had ended, that the slow, careful raising of the Yasa was begun. The Yasa was the great code of the Mongol Empire. It was the slow, careful, long-laid law of the people of the felt-walled tents. It was given over the next many days, in the councils of the central yurt, in the soft amber light of the long, careful summer evenings, with the slow Mongol scribes in their faded grey wool deals, writing slow, careful, old Mongol script across long, fine-grained sheepskin parchments. The Asa forbade the killing of one Mongol by another Mongol over property. The Asa forbade the stealing of horses. The Asa forbade the taking of another man's wife. The Asa forbade the cutting of running water. The Asa established the careful tolerance of all the religions of the steppe, the long, slow shamanism of the Borjigin, the long, slow Nestorian Christianity of the Kherate, the long, slow Buddhism of the southern clans, the long, slow Islam of the southwestern clans. The Yasa established the steady decimal organization of the army. 10 men in an Arban, 100 men in a Jaegun, 1,000 men in a Mingun, 10,000 men in a Tumen, and the slow, careful ranking of the captains by long, careful merit. The Yasa established the careful keeping of the promises of the Khan. The Yasa established the long, careful, steady protection of the herders, the messengers, the merchants, the travelling teachers, the women, the children, the old. The Yasa established the careful, steady opening of the long, slow steppe road. It was the long-laid law of the empire that he had not yet won. It was the patient frame inside which the slow conquering would begin. If this slow story is keeping you company tonight, take a moment to press the like button below. It helps these histories find the longest nights. The conquering began in the soft, warm light of the late summer of 1209, 3 years after the Great Kurultai. He had spent the 3 years in the preparation. He had drilled his army in long, careful concentric circles on the open green-gold steppe. He had set the slow, careful new Tumens under the careful, steady hands of his sworn captains, Bo-Orchu, Mukhali, Jelme, Subutai, Jebe, Kasar, Belgutei, and the slow, careful younger commanders of the next generation. He had set up the first network of mounted scouts that would eventually become the great Mongol postal service, the Yam, with relay stations of fresh horses set every 25 miles along the slow steppe roads, and the riders riding day and night between them carrying the messages of the Khan. He had set up the first network of merchants, the Ortog, under the long careful protection of the steppe roads, who would eventually carry the slow caravans of the future Pax Mongolica from the deep eastern coast of China to the deep western shore of the Black Sea. The first campaign was against the Western Shia. The Western Sia, also called the Tangut, were a kingdom of perhaps 1.5 million people on the careful southern edge of the Mongolian steppe, in the rolling country of the Upper Yellow River. They had high mud-brick walled cities and a steady written script of their own. and they had a long, careful, steady standing army of perhaps 50,000 soldiers, and they had a slow diplomatic alliance with the Jin dynasty of North China, who held the great walled city of Zhongdu, and who had paid the Western Xie a careful, steady annual tribute for many decades to keep them friendly on the southern edge of the steppe. The campaign began in the soft, warm light of the late summer of 1209. He led perhaps 50,000 mounted Mongol horsemen south across the Gobi Desert. He came to the slow first walls of the Tangut fortresses on the soft, cool dusk of the end of the late summer. He laid the long, careful first siege. The Mongols had not yet learned, in those slow first years, the art of breaking high walls. The siege was long, the siege was hard. He sat for a long quiet while in the soft amber light of his great central felt yurt, outside the high mud-brick walls, in the cool blue dusk of the careful early autumn evenings, looking at the slow walls in the soft amber light of the slow-turning campfires, and he thought, in the slow weight of his own deep, dark, steady eyes, of the patience of his mother Holan, who had taught him at the age of 9 that the only way through a hard thing was the slow, careful, steady walking through of it. He waited. He sent the small, careful, steady scouts to the upper river. He had them open a dike. He flooded the plain. The high mud-brick walls of the Tangut fortress went under the cool grey water for the slow winter of 1209. The mud-brick began to soften. The Tangut Emperor sent out an embassy in the cool grey light of the early spring of 1210, asking for the slow terms. He gave them. He took the tribute. He took a Tangut princess as a wife for himself. He turned his army home in the cool, warm light of the late spring of 1210. The first campaign of the empire was complete. The second campaign was against the Jin dynasty of North China. The Jin had ruled the slow country of North China for perhaps 90 years. They were a Jurchen people from the deep northeastern forests who had taken North China from the Song dynasty in a war 100 years before, and who held the great walled city of Zhongdu, which is the city we now call Beijing, with perhaps 4 million people and a great standing army of perhaps 300,000 soldiers, and a slow-walled empire of perhaps 50 million people. The Mongols had paid the Jin an annual tribute for many decades. The Jin emperors had treated the Mongol Khans with the contempt of a slow, civilized people for the barbarians of their northern frontier. In the soft, cool dusk of an autumn evening in 1210, when a Jin embassy arrived at the great central felt yurt of Genghis Khan to demand the annual tribute in the name of a new young Jin emperor named Wanyan Yongji, Genghis Khan stood up very slowly from the patterned wool rug. He turned south. He spat very slowly toward the deep southern horizon. He said only, very flatly, "I do not pay tribute to a fool." He sent the slow embassy home empty. In the soft, warm light of the late spring of 1211, the army of the Mongols crossed the Great Wall at the passes of the Upper Ongud country, and the slow war with the Jin began. The war was long, the war was hard. The Mongols learned, in the years between 1211 and 1215, the art of breaking high walls. They learned it from the Chinese siege engineers whom they took into their service. They learned it from the slow Khitan officers whom they took into their service. They learned it from the captured Tangut artillerymen whom they took into their service. By the soft, warm light of the late spring of 1215, they had broken the outer ring of the Jin defences, and they had laid the siege of the great walled city of Zhongdu itself. Zhongdu held for many months. The walls were long, the walls were thick, the garrison was many, the grain stores were full. But the slow weight of the Mongol siege was heavy. The winter of 1214 had been hard. The spring of 1215 had been hungry. By the soft, warm light of the late spring of 1215, the people of Zhongdu were eating their own horses. By the cool grey dawn of an early summer morning in late May of 1215, the gates of Zhongdu were opened. The slow Mongol horsemen rode in. The sack of Zhongdu was long. The sack of Zhongdu was very hard. We will not move through the weeks of it slowly, because the weeks of it are the weeks that the slow, careful, steady chronicles of the slow wars of the open steppe have always had to pass over with the weight of a long, careful, steady silence. The fires of the great walled city burned for many days. The grain stores of the great walled city were emptied. The slow artisans of the great walled city were taken under the protection of the Mongol commanders and were sent north across the Gobi to the slow new Mongol capital that was being slowly built on the upper Orkhon River, where their hands would weave the silks and forge the iron and carve the slow wood of the empire to come. The learned men of the Great Walled City were taken under the protection of the slow Mongol Khan himself, and were given seats in the council of the empire to come. One of them, a slow Khitan minister named Yelu Chukai, of about 25 years, lean tall, neatly cropped dark hair, deep-set, steady dark eyes, in a long, fitted dark blue silk Khitan scholar's robe, was brought before Genghis Khan in the soft amber light of a late summer afternoon in 1215, in the great central felt yurt outside the broken walls of Zhongdu, and Genghis Khan looked at him for a long quiet while, and at last said, very softly, very flatly, "What good are you to me, Khitan?" And Yelu Chukai answered very softly, very flatly, "My Lord Khan, the empire was won on horseback, it cannot be governed on horseback." And Genghis Khan lifted his thin weathered hand, and Yelu Chukai walked across the patterned wool rug to the right side of the throne, and stood there, and stayed there, for the rest of his own life, and was, in the slow years that came, the civilizing hand inside the empire of the open steppe. The third great campaign was against the Khwarezmian Empire. The Khwarezmian Empire was a slow Persian-Turkic empire of perhaps 15 million people on the wide green plains of Central Asia, between the Caspian Sea and the Hindu Kush Mountains. Its slow capital was the great oasis city of Samarkand, and its major cities were Bukhara, Merv, Nishapur, Herat, Urgench, Balkh, and Otrar. Its ruler was a slow young Shah named Ala ad-Din Muhammad, who had inherited the empire from his father, who had himself inherited it from his grandfather, and who held in 1218 the slow largest standing army of the Islamic world, perhaps 400,000 soldiers, including the famous Turkic Mamluk cavalry of his mother Turkan Khatun. He was, in the slow, soft, warm light of the late spring of 1218, the most powerful Muslim ruler east of the Mediterranean. He did not fear the Mongol Khan of the open steppe. He should have feared him. The war began over a single slow caravan. Genghis Khan, in the soft, warm light of the late spring of 1218, sent a caravan of perhaps 400 Muslim merchants, many of them traders of the Pax Mongolica that he was already beginning to build along the slow steppe roads, to the frontier city of Otrar on the Sir-Daria River, with the embassy asking only for the slow opening of the trade. The governor of Otrar, a man named Inalchuk, who had an older grievance with the slow steppe, took the caravan on the soft cool dusk of an early summer evening, accused them of espionage, and had them all killed. He took their silver, he took their slow horses, he took their silks. He sent the ambassador's severed head back to the Khan of the open steppe in a small wooden box with a slow, defiant message. Genghis Khan, in the soft amber light of a late summer afternoon in 1218, sat for a long quiet while in his great central felt yurt on the upper Orkhon. He did not move. He did not speak. He laid the severed head on the patterned wool rug at the foot of the throne. He looked at it for a long quiet while. At last he stood up very slowly. He walked out of the great central felt yurt. He climbed alone, in the soft amber light of the late summer afternoon, up the slow deep blue rising shoulder of the sacred Burkhan Khaldun mountain. He stayed up there alone for 3 days and 3 nights. The cool blue summer winds moved very slowly through the deep stone pine forests around him. He did not eat. He did not drink. He did not speak. On the cool grey light of the early dawn of the 4th day, he walked slowly down the rising shoulder of the sacred mountain. He came to the slow, great central felt yurt. He laid his thin weathered hand on the wooden doorframe. He said only, very softly, very flatly, to his sworn captains gathered in the inner ring of the camp, "Heaven has heard, we ride west." He rode west in the slow summer of 1219 with perhaps 200,000 mounted Mongol horsemen. The war that followed was the greatest single military undertaking of the early 13th century. It is also the slow war that the chronicles of the Persian Islamic world have always had the hardest time forgiving. We will move through it slowly in the slow sleep register of the slow long evening, but we will not look away from the weight of it. Otrar was taken in the winter of 1219. Inalchuk, the governor who had killed the slow caravan, was taken alive and was brought before Genghis Khan in the cool, grey light of an early winter morning, and Genghis Khan looked at him for a long quiet while, and at last said, very softly, very flatly, "You took the silver, you took the silver." And he had molten silver poured slowly into the slow eyes and the ears and the mouth of the governor. The slow chroniclers of Persia would write of it long afterward. The chroniclers of the steppe would not. Bukhara was taken in the soft, warm light of an early spring afternoon in 1220. The slow garrison of Bukhara, perhaps 15,000 Khwarezmian soldiers, made a sortie out of the eastern gate at the slow, cool, grey light of the early dawn, and were broken in a single morning's battle on the soft, cool plain east of the slow city, and the people of the city opened the gates at the soft, warm light of the late afternoon. Genghis Khan rode into the slow city on the soft, warm light of the next morning. He rode slowly through the winding stone streets. He rode to the great central mosque of the city. He rode his tall steppe horse slowly into the slow doorway of the great central mosque, in his fitted dark grey travelling deal and his tall pointed black and red felt cap with a single eagle feather, and he sat there on his slow tall steppe horse, in the soft warm shadow of the tall blue-tiled domed brick mosque, in the cool blue light of the slow late afternoon, and he looked down at the gathered elders of the city kneeling on the worn stone floor before him. He said only, very softly, very flatly, in the slow old steppe Mongol that the Persian translators standing beside him had to render in their careful soft Persian for the gathered elders. "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment such as me upon you." The slow gathered elders did not answer at first. He looked at them for a long quiet while. He said, tell me, elders of Bukhara, what is this place?" The oldest elder, a long-bearded man of perhaps 70 in a long cream and blue silk robe and a small white turban, lifted his thin, weathered hand very slowly. He said, "My lord, this is the great central mosque of our city. This is the place where we pray. This is the place where we have prayed for 150 years. He said, "And what do you ask of your God in this place?" The old elder said, "We ask of our God that he may have mercy on us. We ask of our God that he may forgive us our sins. We ask of our God that he may keep us in his open hand." He said, "And does your God hear?" The old elder said, "We have always believed that our God hears, my lord. Today we are not sure." He said, "Then I will tell you what your God has heard. Your God has heard the sins of the young Shah who killed my embassy. Your God has heard the sins of the governor who poured out the silver of my caravan. Your God has sent me. I am the punishment. I will not leave until the punishment is complete, but I will leave when it is complete. I am not here for your great central mosque. I am not here for your prayers. I am here for your sins. When the sins are paid, I will turn the tall steppe horse very slowly, and I will ride out of the doorway, and I will not come back." The old elder lifted his thin weathered hand very slowly. He said, "My lord, may we ask one thing?" He said, "Ask." The old elder said, "May we keep the prayers? May we keep the great central mosque? May we keep the place where we have prayed for 150 years? He looked at the old elder for a long quiet while. He said only, very softly, very flatly, "Keep the prayers, keep the mosque, keep the place. The Yasser of the Mongols does not touch the prayers of any man. The Yasser of the Mongols does not touch the place of any man's God. Keep them." The old elder lowered his head very slowly. He said only, "Thank you, my lord." The soft warm wind of the late afternoon moved very slowly through the tall blue-tiled domed brick mosque. The soft amber light of the late afternoon fell very slowly across the slow worn stone floor. He turned his tall steppe horse very slowly. He rode out of the doorway of the great central mosque. He rode slowly back through the slow, winding stone streets. The people of Bukhara watched him go. Samarkand was taken in the soft, warm light of a late spring afternoon in 1220. The garrison of Samarkand, perhaps 110,000 slow Khwarezmian soldiers, made a sortie out of the northern gate at the cool grey light of the slow early dawn, and were broken in a single morning's battle on the soft, cool plain north of the city, and the slow people of the city opened the gates at the soft, warm light of the late afternoon. Merv was taken in the soft, warm light of an early summer afternoon in 1221. Nishapur was taken in the slow, soft, warm light of a late spring afternoon in 1221, after the son-in-law of Genghis Khan, a young Mongol commander named Tokchar, was killed by an arrow from the slow walls of the city, and the widow of Tokchar, the daughter of Genghis Khan, in the slow, cool, grey light of the next dawn, walked slowly across the taken city, and gave the order, very flatly, very slowly, that no living thing in the slow city was to be left alive. Urgench was taken in the soft, warm light of a late winter afternoon in 1221. Herat was taken in the soft, warm light of a late summer afternoon in 1221. Balkh was taken in the soft warm light of an early autumn afternoon in 1221. The slow Khwarezmian Empire, in the soft warm light of a late autumn afternoon in 1221, was no longer an empire. It was a ruined ring of broken cities under the Pax Mongolica. The slow young Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad had fled westward in the cool grey dusk of an early summer evening in 1220, with a small handful of his own remaining horsemen, and had died of pleurisy on a small island in the slow Caspian Sea, in the cool grey dawn of an autumn morning in 1221, alone, in a borrowed shepherd's tent on the cold pale shore. He was 49 years old. It was during the slow long pursuit of the young Shah that Jebi and Subutai began their great cavalry raid. They had been sent by Genghis Khan in the soft warm light of a late summer afternoon in 1220 to find and take the slow fleeing Shah. They had not found him, but they had not turned back. They had ridden west with 20,000 mounted Mongol horsemen. Jebe at the head of the column, Subutai at the right hand. They had ridden west across the slow high passes of the Caucasus Mountains in the cool blue light of the deep winter of 1221. They had ridden west across the slow, cold, dark forests of the deep northern Persian plateau. They had ridden north across the wide, cold, pale shores of the Caspian. They had ridden north across the slow, wide green plains of the Cuman Turks of the deep southern Russian steppe. They had broken the combined armies of the slow Cumans and the Russian princes of Kiev and Galicia and Chernigov on the cold, wide, rushing Kalka River in the cool grey light of an early summer afternoon in 1223. They had taken the slow Russian princes alive, and had laid them on a wooden plank of a great steppe banquet table, and had laid a second plank on top of them, and had eaten their banquet of mutton and fermented mare's milk on top of the slow plank in the soft warm light of the early evening, while the Russian princes died slowly of the slow weight of the banquet beneath the wooden plank, and the Mongol shaman of the slow column had said in his soft careful Mongol that the Yasa forbade the spilling of the slow blood of a noble. They had ridden home in the cool warm light of the late spring of 1224. They had crossed the Caspian shore. They had crossed the slow Aral shore. They had crossed the wide green plains of the upper Sirdaria. They had ridden 5,000 miles. They had not lost a battle. It was on the cool warm light of an early spring afternoon in 1224, on the slow wide green plain of the upper Aral, that Jebi fell ill. He had ridden hard for 5 years. He was 47 years old. The cool blue dusk hours of the deep northern Russian winter had reached him. He could no longer eat. He could no longer drink. He could no longer ride. Subutai sat beside him in the slow, soft, warm light of a late summer afternoon, in a small hide-hung yurt at the edge of the column, and laid his weathered hand very carefully on the slow, thin shoulder of his old riding friend. Jebi lifted his sharp, dark eyes very slowly. He said, "Subutai, old riding friend." Subutai said, "Yes, Jebi." He said, "Are you here?" Subutai said, "I am here, Jebi. I have not moved from your side." He said, "I cannot see you any more. The cool blue dusk has come into the small hide-hung yurt." Subutai said, "Yes, Jebe, the cool blue dusk has come." He said, "Subutai, listen to me." Subutai said, "I am listening, Jebi." He said, "I have ridden a long way. I have ridden 5,000 miles. I have not lost a battle. I have not been defeated. I have done what he asked." Subutai said, "Yes, Jebi, you have done what he asked." He said, "Subutai, take a single arrow from my quiver. Take only one, the thin one with the grey-fletched feathers, the one I have carried since the cool blue dawn of the morning we crossed the Caucasus." Subutai said, "I have it, Jebe." He said, "Carry it home. Carry it across the long, wide green plains of the upper Sirdaria. Carry it across the long, wide, pale shores of the Aral. Carry it across the long, wide, green-gold steppe of the upper Onon. Carry it to the great central felt yurt of the lean, tall man who took me from the dust of the cool blue evening of the Black Forest. Lay it on the patterned wool rug at the foot of his throne. Tell him only this. Tell him only, I have done what you asked." Subutai said, "I will take it, Jebi. I will lay it at his feet. I will tell him." He said, "Subutai, one more thing." Subutai said, "Yes, Jebi." He said, "Tell him also that I held the arrow for him in the cool blue dawn of every morning of these 23 years. Tell him also that the arrow was always his arrow. Tell him also that the arrow has flown." Subutai said only, very softly, very flatly, I will tell him. I will lay the arrow at his feet. I will tell him every word." Jebi closed his sharp dark eyes very slowly. He died at the cool blue dusk of that summer evening, on the wide green plain of the slow Upper Aral, in the small hide-hung yurt at the edge of the column. Subutai carried the slow single slim-feathered Mongol war arrow home across the wide green plains of the Upper Sirdaria. He laid it very carefully across the patterned wool rug at the foot of the slow, great central yurt of Genghis Khan, in the soft amber light of a late summer afternoon in 1224. Genghis Khan lifted his deep, dark, steady eyes very slowly. He looked at the single, slim-feathered Mongol war arrow for a long, quiet while. He said only, very softly, very flatly, "Then it is done." Subutai said, "He sent words also, my lord." He said, "What words?" Subutai said, "He said to tell you that he held the arrow for you in the cool blue dawn of every morning of these 23 years. He said to tell you that the arrow was always your arrow. He said to tell you that the arrow has flown." He said only, very softly, "Yes, yes, the arrow has flown." Subutai said, "My lord, he died well. He died with his sharp dark eyes lifted to the cool blue dusk of the small hide-hung yurt. He did not weep, he did not call out, he laid down the arrow himself, he named it himself, he sent it himself. He said, 'He was the cleanest man I ever rode with, Subutai.' Subutai said, 'Yes, my lord, he was.' He said, 'He told me on the cool blue evening of the Black Forest that he would rather give me his life clean than his long life dirty. He gave me both, the clean life and the long life, he gave them both.' Subutai said, 'Yes, my lord.' He said, 'Subutai, sit with me a moment. Drink a small wooden cup of fermented mare's milk with me. Do not say anything, only sit.' Subutai sat. They sat together in the soft amber light of the late summer afternoon. They drank a slow, careful bowl of fermented mare's milk. They did not speak. The slow, soft-turning ribbon of cooking smoke rose into the soft, warm summer wind. He stood up very slowly. He walked out of the great central yurt. He stood for a long quiet while in the soft amber light of the late summer afternoon, with his thin, weathered hand laid carefully on the wooden doorframe of the central yurt, and he watched the ribbon of the slow, cooking smoke rising into the soft, warm summer wind. He did not weep. He did not speak. He walked back into the great central yurt. He picked up the single, slim, feathered Mongol war arrow. He laid it very carefully on the worn, patterned wool rug beside the slow, small, worn iron sealstone of the empire. It stayed there for the rest of his careful life. He came home to the rolling green-gold plain of the Upper Onon in the cool, warm light of an autumn afternoon in 1225, after 7 years of riding west. He was 63 years old. He was tired. The slow weight of the years of riding had settled into the slow, careful weight of his shoulders. Berta was waiting for him at the threshold of the great central felt yurt, in her long, high-pointed Bokta headdress with silver and turquoise plaques and her fitted dark red silk deal. Her deep brown eyes were the same. He dismounted very slowly. He walked across the soft, cool autumn grass to the threshold of the central yurt. He laid his thin, weathered hand on her soft, worn, dark red silk shoulder. He said only, very softly, very flatly, "Wife, I have come back, as I said I would." She lifted her deep brown eyes very slowly. She said only, very softly, very flatly, "I have waited." He had hoped, in the long, slow wait of his 63 years, to set down the bow and the curved sabre. He had hoped to sit at the long, slow evening fires of the great central felt yurt, in the soft amber light of the long, slow autumn evenings, and to listen to the slow, careful counsels of his sons and his sworn captains, and to drink a small, careful bowl of fermented mare's milk in the cool, blue dusk of the autumn evenings, and to ride a tall steppe horse very slowly through the soft, green-gold pastures of the Upper Onon, at the soft, warm light of a late summer afternoon, with his thin, weathered hand resting on the saddle-bow before him, and to grow old slowly under the soft, cool wind of his open steppe. He did not get the long, slow setting down. The Tangut, the Western Shia, the kingdom that had been broken in the campaign of 1209, had refused, in the slow, soft, warm light of the late summer of 1226, to send the auxiliary cavalry that they had promised in the long, careful tribute. The slow Tangut emperor, a young man named Li Xian, had sent a careful, defiant message to the slow, great central felt yurt of the Khan. Genghis Khan had set down the small wooden bowl of fermented mare's milk in his thin, weathered hand. He had stood up very slowly from the patterned wool rug of the central yurt. He had said only, very softly, very flatly, "Saddle the horses, we ride south." The final campaign began in the cool, warm light of the late summer of 1226. The Mongol army moved south across the slow Gobi. The Tangut fortresses fell, one after another, in the long, careful months of the deep autumn and the deep winter. By the slow, soft, warm light of an early summer afternoon in 1227, the capital of the western Xia, a careful walled city named Yinchuan on the slow Upper Yellow River, was under the Mongol siege. The Tangut emperor was inside the slow walls. The end was very near. But Genghis Khan, in the long, careful, soft, warm light of a clear late summer afternoon in early August of 1227, fell from his tall steppe horse during a slow hunt at the foot of the cool, deep stone-pine slopes of the Lupan Mountains. He fell heavily. He did not stand up. His sworn captains lifted him onto a low wooden travelling litter. They carried him to a small hide-hung yurt high in a quiet stone-pine clearing of the cool slopes of the Lupan Range. They sent for his 3 eldest surviving sons. Chagatai had not yet come up from the south, but Ogadai and Tolui were with the army, and Yochi had died of illness on the careful Aral shore 8 months before, in the slow, cool blue dusk of an autumn evening. They came to the small hide-hung yurt. They knelt at the foot of the wooden bed platform. He lay on the platform under a heavy grey wool blanket. His long dark hair, gone streaked with grey, was laid loose across the soft sheepskin pillow. His weathered tan face had gone soft with the long, slow tiredness of a life. His deeply set dark amber eyes had gone tired but were still steady. The slow, soft summer wind moved very slowly through the open hide flap of the yurt. The slow drift of dust motes turned in a long, slow shaft of amber afternoon light falling through the smoke hole. He looked at his sons for a long quiet while. He laid his thin, weathered hand very carefully on the heavy grey wool blanket at his side. He said only, very softly, very flatly, in the long old slow Mongol cadence of the careful sworn passages of the secret history, "My sons, listen to me. The empire is large. The empire will be larger. There is more to take. There is much to keep. I have laid the long, slow, patient frame of the law. I have laid the long, slow, patient frame of the army. I have laid the long, slow, patient frame of the road. The frame is yours. The horses are yours. The bows are yours. The road is yours. The world is yours. But hear me, my sons. If your bodies are tired, your house will fall. If your hands quarrel among themselves, your house will fall. If your tongues wander from the slow, careful, steady promise of your father, your house will fall. Stay together. Listen to one another. Do not become a man who eats the heel of his own hand. Do not become that man." He closed his deeply set dark amber eyes very slowly. He laid his thin, weathered hand very carefully on the soft sheepskin pillow at the side of his cheek. He breathed very slowly. Ogadai lifted his soft, kind, broad, steady face very slowly. He said, "Father, we hear you." He said, "Tolui, are you here?" Tolui said, "I am here, father." He said, Where is Chagatai?" Tolui said, "He is riding up from the south, father. He is 2 days behind us." He said, "And Jochi?" Ogadai said, "Father, Jochi died. He died on the Aral shore, 8 months ago, the cool blue dusk of an autumn evening." He said, Yes, I had forgotten. I am old, my sons. The small dark stone at the bottom of my soul has gone heavy with the long, careful weight of the careful years. Forgive me. Jochi died. Yes, he was the eldest. He was the one who came in. He was always the one who came in. Forgive me, my sons." Ogadai said, "Father, there is nothing to forgive." He said, "Listen to me, my sons, hear me." Tolui said, "We are listening, father." He said, "Ogadai, you will be the next Khan. I have decided. I decided long ago. You are the soft, kind, broad, steady one. You have the generous, open hand. You will keep your brothers from one another. You will hold them. The empire will need a Khan who can hold them. You will be that Khan." Ogadai said, "Yes, father, I will try." He said, "Do not try, do it. Trying is for small things. The empire is not a small thing, promise me." Ogadai said, "I promise, father." He said, "Tolui, You will hold the heart of the empire. You will hold the homeland. You will hold the upper Anon and the upper Khurlan. You will hold the small heart-shaped hill of Deliun Boldar. You will hold the place where I was born. You will hold the place where your mother and I were married. Do you hear me? Tolui said, Yes, father, he said. Sorkaktani is a good wife. She is wise. She is steady. She has the long, careful, patient eyes of your grandmother Hoelun. Listen to her. She will tell you the truth when no one else will. Tolui said, Yes, father. He said, And tell Chagatai, when he comes up, that I'm sorry I will not see him grown into the careful, patient, steady man I know he can become. Tell him to stop quarrelling with Yoshi's sons. Tell him that Yoshi is dead. Tell him that the old quarrel between him and his older brother is a small dark stone at the bottom of both their souls, and that it must be put down now. Tell him I said so. Urgadi said, I will tell him, father. He said, And tell your mother. Urgadi said, What shall we tell her, father? He said, Tell her I have come back, as I said I would. Tell her I have ridden the long, careful ride. Tell her I am tired. Tell her she may rest now. Tell her I have waited for her. Tell her I will go on waiting, Urgadi said. We will tell her. We will tell father. We will tell her every word. He closed his deeply set dark amber eyes very slowly. He laid his thin, weathered hand very carefully on the soft sheepskin pillow at the side of his cheek. He breathed very slowly. He breathed once. He breathed twice. He did not breathe a third time. He died on the soft, warm afternoon of the 18th of August, in the year 1227, in a small hide-hung yurt high, in a quiet stone-pine clearing of the cool, deep slopes of the Liupan Mountains. He was 65 years old. The slow, soft summer wind moved very slowly through the open hide flap of the yurt. The slow, soft drift of dust motes turned in a long, slow shaft of amber, afternoon light falling through the smoke hole. His 3 sons knelt at the foot of the wooden bed platform with their weathered, tan young foreheads lowered. The slow, careful ribbon of cooking smoke rose very slowly from the campfires of the Mongol army at the foot of the cool, deep stone-pine slopes. The empire he had made was 4,000 miles wide. The Mongols held his death secret. The siege of Yinchuan was still going on. The Tangut Emperor inside the slow walls had not yet surrendered. The Mongol commanders, in the soft amber light of the late afternoon of his death, agreed in a long, careful inner council that the death of the Khan must not be known until the slow taking of the capital was complete. They did not strike the careful great central felt yurt. They did not lower the slow great white standard with 9 yak tails on the tall lacquered pole. They did not change the daily routine of the slow camp. The messengers of the long careful yam continued to ride day and night between the slow relay stations. The army continued to drill on the careful soft cool plains. The slow sieges of the last Tangut fortresses continued. Yinchuan opened its gates 2 weeks later, in the soft, warm light of an early September afternoon. The slow Tangut Emperor walked out alone, in his state robes, and was taken into the long, careful Mongol camp, and was killed there in the cool blue dusk of that same evening. The slow capital was emptied. The campaign was complete. Then the careful funeral procession began. The slow body of the dead Khan, wrapped in sheepskins and laid in a long, heavy wooden coffin of carved birchwood, was placed in a wooden travelling litter draped in slow, heavy black wool. The litter was set on a long, careful, great wooden ox cart pulled by 8 slow, careful black oxen. The slow funeral cortege began the ride home in the cool, warm light of an early autumn afternoon in 1227. They rode north across the careful Gobi. They rode north across the slow, long, rolling green-gold steppe of the lower Anon. They rode north toward the deep blue stone-pine forests of the Khenti Mountains, where the slow, sacred Burkan Khaldun rises over the soft, cool plain. The Mongol custom of the burial of a great Khan in those years required absolute secrecy. No man who was not of the long, careful inner ring of the funeral company was to know the slow place of the burial. The funeral company rode north for 40 days, very slowly, very carefully, through the careful, empty open steppe of the upper Anon. Anyone they met along the slow road, herders, travellers, distant clan riders, was killed. The chronicles of the steppe say that 2,000 were killed in the 40 days of the slow procession. They reached the deep blue stone-pine forests of the long, careful Khenti Mountains in the cool grey light of an early winter dawn. They rode into a small hidden valley deep within the slow dark stone-pine forests. They dug a clearing of the soft-turned earth at the careful centre of the valley. They lowered the long, heavy wooden coffin of carved birchwood into the slow clearing. They covered the clearing with the soft-turned earth. They drove 1,000 Mongol horses across the slow clearing again and again in the cool grey light of the next dawn, until the clearing had been erased from the long, careful surface of the slow, soft-turned earth. They planted no stone. They planted no marker. They planted no tree. They rode back across the long open steppe of the Upper Onon in the cool grey light of the early winter days. The careful escort soldiers of the slow funeral procession were themselves killed by the inner ring of the company in the cool blue dusk of the return ride. The slow inner ring of the company was killed by the innermost ring of the company on the long careful last day before the slow return to the great central felt yurt. The careful innermost ring of the company swore a oath of silence to the new young Khan, the slow sun Urgadai, in the cool grey light of the first dawn of the new reign. The slow place of his burial was never told. It has not been told for 800 years. The deep blue stone-pine forests of the Khenti mountains hold it still. The long, careful, soft new grass of the slow many spring rains has long since grown back over the clearing. The careful, slow drifts of the slow many winter snows have long since fallen and melted and fallen again. The long, deep stillness of the sacred mountain has settled over the valley. He lies there. He has lain there for 800 years. He will lie there. Berta outlived him by 3 years. She held the slow inner court of the Northern Empire together in the long, careful first 3 years of the new reign of Urgadai, in the slow, cool, blue dusk evenings of the great central felt yurt on the careful upper Orkhon, with her deep brown eyes lifted very slowly across the slow inner ring of the slow gathering councils. She died in the cool blue dusk of an autumn evening in 1230, of a slow, steady old age, in her own felt yurt at the long careful foot of the slow sacred mountain. She was 68 years old. She was buried beside her sons. In her last days, in the slow soft amber light of late autumn afternoons in 1230, she had spoken often to her granddaughter Sorkaktani Beki, the long careful patient steady wife of her son Tolui, who would in the years to come hold the long careful inner court of the Mongol world together with the same long careful steady hand her grandmother-in-law had held it. She had said, "Daughter, listen to me." Sorkaktani had said, "I am listening, mother." She had said, "What I held in my own slow, long, careful, steady hand for 52 years is now in your hand. Hold it carefully. Do not let it fall." Sorkaktani had said, "I will not let it fall, mother." She had said, "The men will quarrel. The men always quarrel. Chagatai will quarrel with the sons of Jochi. Urgadai will quarrel with himself. Tolui will quarrel with his cup of fermented mare's milk." Sorkaktani had laughed softly. She had said, "Yes, mother." She had said, "But the women must not quarrel. The women must hold. The women have always held. The women of the Mongols of the open steppe have always held. Do you hear me, daughter?" Sorkaktani had said, "I hear you, mother." She had said, "I waited for him for 9 months in a Merkit yurt on the banks of the Selenga. I waited for him for 7 years before that, in my father's yurt after he rode out at the age of 9. I waited for him for 7 years after the Khwarezmian campaign, on the Upper Onon while he rode west. I have done a great deal of waiting in my long, careful, patient, steady life, daughter." Sorkaktani had said, "Yes, mother, you have." She had said, "And I would do it all again." Sorkaktani had said, "I know, mother." She had said, "He has come back as he said he would. The slow, long, careful, steady road has at last brought him home. I will go to him now. Do not weep when I go. I have waited a long time." Sorkaktani had said, "I will not weep when you go, mother. I will hold what you held. I will not let it fall. I will not weep." She had closed her deep brown eyes very slowly. She had breathed once. She had breathed twice. She had not breathed a third time. The empire he made grew. It grew for the next 40 years under the careful hands of his sons and his grandsons and his great-grandsons. Urgadai, the soft kind, broad, steady son with the generous, slow, open face, ruled from the new-walled capital at Karakorum on the Upper Orkhon. He sent the armies of his nephew Batu west into Russia, and Batu took Kiev in 1240, and Batu rode his long, careful column to within 40 miles of Vienna in 1241, and Vienna would have fallen in the long warm summer of 1242 if Ögedei had not died in the long cool dusk of an autumn evening in 1241 and called the careful army home. Munka, the grandson, ruled from 1251 to 1259, and sent his brother Hulagu west into Persia, and Hulagu took the fortress of Alamut in 1256, and the long, careful walled city of Baghdad in 1258, and would have taken the careful walled city of Damascus in 1260 if Munka had not died in the long, cool dusk of an autumn evening and called the army home. Kublai, the grandson, ruled from 1260 to 1294, and built the new walled capital of Khanbalik on the site of the broken Zhongdu, and ruled the long, careful Yuan dynasty of all of China, and received in his careful court a young Italian merchant named Marco Polo, in the cool warm light of a late summer afternoon in 1275, who carried home to Venice the tales of the long careful empire of his great-grandfather. The careful empire stretched at the height of the long careful Pax Mongolica, from the careful eastern shore of the Sea of Japan to the western shore of the Black Sea. It was the largest contiguous land empire that had ever been, or that has ever been since. But empires drift, the way the slow, long ribbon of cooking smoke drifts on the long open evening wind of the steppe. The long careful Pax Mongolica held for perhaps 150 years. The careful Yuan dynasty in China fell in the long cool dusk of 1368. The Ilkhanate in Persia fell in the long cool dusk of 1335. The long careful Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia broke into careful smaller pieces in the long cool dusk of the 14th century. The Golden Horde in Russia held until the long cool dusk of 1480. The long careful Mongol world drifted slowly into the careful slow new world of the slow new languages and the slow new flags and the slow new walls. The steppe itself, the long careful soft green gold rolling country of the Upper Onon and the Upper Kurlan went on. The careful felt-walled yurts went on. The slow ribbons of cooking smoke went on. The long careful slow drift of the small flocks of fat-tailed sheep through the long open spring pastures went on. The careful, slow, patient, careful turning of the 9 long horsehair yak tails on the long, careful, tall, lacquered wooden pole at the careful sacred mountain went on. It is going on tonight, very slowly, in the soft, cool dusk of the long, open evening of the Upper Onon. It is going on tonight, very slowly, while you are listening to this slow, careful voice in the dark of your own slow, quiet room. If you have ever loved a quiet listener of the steppe wind, subscribe to Quiet Centuries. We tell these histories softly because some lives are best understood at the slow speed they were lived. This is the slow, long story of a small Mongol boy born on the soft green gold grass of the Upper Onon, in the cool, pale dawn of the early spring of 1162, with a small dark blood clot held tightly in his small newborn fist. This is the slow, long story of a 9-year-old boy who walked out of his father's yurt in the cool blue dusk of an autumn evening, and who sat down at the edge of his father's small herd of horses, and who watched them move without moving himself, until the soft, pale dawn of the next morning. This is the slow, long story of a 14-year-old boy who fell asleep in the long, deep grass of a small willow thicket beside a slow steppe river, while his enemies passed over him with their long willow rods, and who walked 9 days west across the open steppe to his mother's yurt, and who held his mother very tightly for a long quiet while at the threshold of the central yurt without weeping. This is the slow, long story of a 17-year-old man who rode west to find a small, dark-braided Ongurut girl who had been promised to him at the age of 9 and who had waited. This is the slow, long story of a 24-year-old archer renamed Jebe, the Arrow, who flew where he was sent for 23 years, and whose last act was to send a single slim feathered arrow back across 5,000 miles to his old riding friend with a single careful message. This is the slow, long story of a 44-year-old Mongol Khan who stood on a great white felt dais on the soft cool plain of the Upper Onon in the deep summer of 1206, and who looked east before he looked at any of the assembled clans. This is the slow, long story of a 65-year-old Khan in a hide-hung yurt high in the cool stone-pine slopes of the Lupan Mountains, whose last words to his sons were 6 soft, careful, steady words of the old steppe Mongol: "If your bodies are tired, your house will fall." This is the slow, long story of a long, careful, empty, open clearing of soft-turned earth in a small hidden valley deep within the deep blue stone pine forests of the Khenti Mountains, over which 1,000 careful Mongol horses rode again and again in the cool grey light of an early winter dawn, until the clearing had been erased from the surface of the soft-turned earth. It is also a slow, long story of a slow, long, careful kindness. It is the slow, long story of a stooped old Borjigin midwife who knelt at the bedside of a young noblewoman in the soft, pale dawn of an early spring morning, and who turned a small newborn fist over very gently, and who said, very softly, "This is a great sign, my lady." It is the slow, long story of a slow, careful Taichiwud servant named Sorkanshira, who slipped a small wooden wedge under the iron pin of a heavy wooden kangwei in the cool blue light of an early summer evening, and who said only, very flatly, "Do not be caught." It is the slow, long story of an old Keret Khan named Togrul, who took a heavy dark brown sable cloak from the patterned wool rug of his own throne, and who laid his weathered hand on the small thin shoulder of a lean young Mongol kneeling before him, and who said only, very flatly, "I will be your second father, my son." It is the slow, long story of a slow Khitan minister named Yelu Chukai, who said in the soft amber light of a late summer afternoon, "My lord Khan, the empire was won on horseback, but it cannot be governed on horseback." It is the slow, long story of a slow, long, careful daughter of Dei Sishen named Berta, who lifted her deep brown eyes very slowly to the lean boy at her father's right hand, and who said only, very softly, "I have waited." It is, in the long, slow drift of the slow centuries, the slow, long story of every life that has been lived in the patient, steady manner of the open steppe, slowly, carefully, steadily, without hurry, with the careful weight of the slow, soft eyes lifted toward the deep blue rising shoulder of the sacred mountain in the cool blue dawn of the early autumn morning, with the slow weight of the slow, soft hand laid carefully on the worn wooden door frame of the central yurt at the soft amber light of the late summer evening. It is the slow, long story of every life that has been lived between the cooking fire and the sleeping place. It is the slow, long story of every life that has been lived between the slow, soft, pale dawn and the cool blue dusk. The wind is moving very slowly tonight, on the long open evening of the Upper Anon. The slow, long ribbon of a single small cooking fire is rising into the soft, cool wind, in the deep middle distance, from the smoke hole of a single small white felt yurt, on the soft green gold rolling grass. A small Mongolian herder boy of about 9, in a faded blue-grey wool deal, is sitting alone at the edge of a small herd of perhaps 15 shaggy steppe horses, in the cool blue dusk of a late summer evening, watching them move without moving himself. He is the long, careful, small grandson of a slow, small grandson of a small grandson of a careful, small grandson of a slow, small grandson, 800 years removed, of the small heart-shaped hill of Deliun Boldor. The small heart-shaped hill is still there, still rising about 30 metres from the soft green-gold floor of the steppe, still standing alone in the slow weight of the long, open evening. The slow Anon river is still running past it, very slowly. The slow, soft wind is still moving in the long, dry summer grass of the small heart-shaped hill, very slowly. The slow, long, careful, soft amber light of the late summer evening is still falling on the soft green-gold grass. He has lain there for 800 years. He will lie there for many more. The slow, careful weight of his slow, steady life moves very slowly across the long, careful, patient, soft, cool dusk of the long, open evening. Very slowly, very slowly, very slowly, until the soft, cool dusk has at last become the cool blue night, and the slow, great wash of stars has at last come out across the dome of the long, open sky, and the slow, careful, single, small ribbon of cooking smoke has at last drifted very slowly out into the soft, cool wind, and the slow, long, careful, patient, steady world has at last gone very still, and the slow, careful, patient, steady listener has at last gone very still, and the slow, patient, steady night has at last gone very still, and the slow, long, careful, patient, steady wind moves very slowly through the long, dry summer grass of the small heart-shaped hill, and the slow, careful, patient, steady night moves very slowly into the slow, patient, steady morning, and the slow, long, careful, patient, steady morning moves very slowly into the slow, careful, patient, steady day, and the slow, patient, steady day moves very slowly into the slow, long, careful, patient, steady evening, and the slow, careful, patient, steady evening moves very slowly into the slow, patient, steady night, and the slow, patient, steady world goes on, very slowly, the way it has always gone on, the way the patient, steady step has always gone on, the way the long, careful, patient, steady wind has always gone on, the way the slow, patient, steady stars have always gone on, the way the patient, steady 9 long horsehair yak tails on the careful, patient, steady, tall, lacquered wooden pole at the slow, patient, steady sacred mountain have always gone on, very slowly, very slowly, very slowly, until at last you are asleep.